I like everybody from a tech standpoint to put their cell phones on off or to put them on silent. I want to welcome everyone to the quarterly board meeting of the Osteopathic Medical Board of California. This meeting is being held on February 13th, 2025, and the time is 9:06. This meeting is occurring at the Department of Consumer Affairs Headquarters Building in the hearing room located at 1625 North Market Boulevard, Sacramento, California, 95834. Today's meeting will be run according to the Open Meeting Act as required by law. The meeting will be conducted using the following guidelines. The board welcomes public comments on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comments prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. During each agenda item, the host moderating the WebEx event will activate the Q&A feature of WebEx and will ask everyone wishing to make a public comment to indicate so by replying yes. The host will then call on individuals who indicated they wish to make a public comment by the name they joined the WebEx event as. When called upon, the host will unmute the microphone of the individual, and they will have 3 minutes to make his or her comment. The host will audibly announce when 15 seconds remain to conclude the public comment. After the 3 minutes have lapsed, the individual will be placed back on mute. Only one public comment per agenda item is allowed per attendee. All participants will mute their microphone or phone during each presentation of the agenda topic. At the conclusion of the discussion from the board members, I will ask for public comments. At the conclusion of the discussion period, I will call for a vote if necessary or move to the next agenda item. All in attendance should keep their comments specific to the agenda item being discussed. An opportunity for public comment for items not on the agenda will be provided. And so please be advised that during this comment period, the board cannot engage in discussions, cannot take actions on any matter that is raised. The only thing that we can do is to place it on an agenda item for a future meeting. So now I want to establish a quorum. I would like to call the meeting to order and ask the board members to unmute their microphones. And Machiko, will you please call the roll?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Corey Damian,
Present.
John Cummins,
Present.
Brett Lockman,
Present.
Andrew Marino,
Present.
Hamesh Patel, Denise Pines,
Present.
Matthew Swain.
Present.
A quorum has been established.
Great. Moving on to agenda item number 2, reading of the board's mission statement by Executive Director Erica Calderon.
Thank you, Madam Board President Pines. The mission statement of the Osteopathic Medical Board of California is the following: to protect the public by requiring competency, accountability, and integrity in the safe practice of medicine by osteopathic physicians and surgeons.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to agenda item number 3, review and possible approval of the amended August 15th, 2024 and the November 14th, 2024 board meeting minutes. And we are joined by our Associate Governmental Program Analyst, Beth Dutchler, who will lead us through these minutes. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm here to present the amended board meeting minutes from the August 15th, 2024 board meeting and the draft of the meeting minutes for the November 14th board meeting. I will be starting with August. The amendments were made on the agenda items 13 and 14, and those start on page 6. I will be starting there to see if there's any corrections or edits or questions. So we're starting with page 6. Any edits? Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. page 12, page 13, page 14, page 15, page 16, page 17, page 18, page 19, and then 20 concludes those amendments.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
I will move on to the November minutes. And we're going to start from page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. And that concludes those minutes. I'll turn it back to Madam Pines.
Thank you, Beth. Okay, so do any members have any additions or corrections to the board meetings? If not, let's get a motion to adopt the board meeting minutes, August 15th, and that were amended in November 15th. Do I have a motion?
I move it.
Can I get a second?
I second.
Great. The motion has been made and second. Any additional comments from board members? Any comments from the public in the room? Moderator, are there any comments online?
Thank you. This is the moderator. If anyone would like to make a question or make a comment about either of the sets of minutes or motions, you can look for the hand icon at the bottom of your WebEx screen or behind the 3-dot other options if you're on a mobile device, and click that. Each person will have 3 minutes with a 15-second warning. Are there any comments? I do not see any requests. Shall I close that feature?
Okay. Machiko, can we do a confirmation of vote?
For Damian,
Aye.
John Cummins,
Aye.
Dr. Lockman,
Aye.
Andrew Marino,
Aye.
Denise Pines,
Aye.
Dr. Swain,
Aye.
motion carries.
Great. Okay, moving to next agenda item 4, public comment on items not on the agenda. During the meeting today, public comment is welcome on any agenda item as the item is taken up by the board. Please be aware that public comment during this agenda item should provide information to the board members and is not a discussion between the board members and the public. The only action board members can take is to listen to comments, decide whether they want it as a future agenda item on the topic. No other action can be taken on that item at this meeting. I know this may seem at times that the board members are not being responsive, but we are following these guidelines because it's critical to ensure that the rules of the Open Meeting Act are followed to avoid compromising the speaker's goals or the board's mission. In order to allow the board sufficient time to conduct its scheduled meeting, the board will limit the time given to each person to 3 minutes. It will not be necessary to repeat statements or views of a previous speaker. It is sufficient to state that you agree. As a reminder, please do not disclose details of an active enforcement case or licensing matter, as such discussions are considered ex parte communications, as they could provide information to members that is outside of the record in violation of the Administrative Procedure Act. So therefore, such discussions could create a conflict and lead to a board decision being challenged in the Superior Court. The board can receive comments regarding the board's processes in general, but it cannot receive comments on specific case circumstances where the decision is still pending. In addition, the board would like the public to address the board as a whole and not individual members. The board appreciates your cooperation and assistance in meeting its legal mandate. If you want to comment on an agenda item, please wait until we get to that agenda item Comments at this time are only for items not on the agenda. And again, please limit your time to 3 minutes. So I'd like to see if there's anyone in the room who would like to make a comment during this public comment period. No. Moderator, is there anyone requesting a public comment online?
This is the moderator. If anyone would like to make a comment on something that's not already on the agenda, you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, typically at the bottom of the WebEx screen. Request a comment will be called on in the order received. And if you're on a mobile device, the hand icon may be behind the 3-dot other options. Are there any requests for comment? I do not see any requests. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, thank
Thank you.
you.
You're welcome.
Moving to agenda item 5, the president's report. The Osteopathic Medical Board of California spent much of the first 2 quarters of 2024-2025 fiscal year working hard to meet our objectives for enhancing consumer protection. The Osteopathic Medical Board has been dedicated to advancing consumer protection goals during these quarters. Regular discussions with Executive Director Erica Calderon have been instrumental in shaping meeting agendas and progressing board projects. As you know, I sit on the board of Federation of State Medical Boards and just returned from our meeting where more states have enacted legislation to increase the physician workforce by easing license requirements for internationally trained physicians. In just 10 months, 9 states have passed legislation. They include Tennessee, Idaho, Florida, Illinois, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Virginia, and Wisconsin. There are 10 additional states that have introduced similar legislation. And about 10 years ago, the Medical Board of California was the first to really enact this type of legislation, easing postgraduate training requirements with the Mexico pilot program, which is still active. The difference is the rigor the physicians went through provided a high level of consumer safety. In late April, the FSMB will launch a year-long multi-million-dollar public awareness and campaign that is digital advertising on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram to raise awareness about the work of all public boards. So we may see more activity to our website or even more complaints coming in once the public has been educated on what boards do. And finally, the FSMB's annual meeting is in Seattle this year between April 24th and 26th, and I hope DCA approves our executive director to attend, and I also encourage our board members to attend as well. That is the end of my report. Are there any comments from members? Any comments from members in the room? Moderator, are there anyone requesting a public comment online?
This is the moderator. If anyone would like to make a comment, you may click the hand icon. Are there any comments on this item? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes.
Thank you.
Let's move to agenda item number 6, board member communication with interested parties. I'm going to start with myself. I recently produced a film called The M Factor, Shedding the Silence on Menopause, and it was screened February 5th by Assemblymember Rebecca Braun-Kahn. I was not in attendance, but the director participated on a panel with the assembly member. Is there anyone else that would like to share any interested party meetings that they had? No? Okay. Are there any comments from members of the public in the room? Moderator, is there anyone requesting a public comment online?
This is the moderator. If anyone would like to make a comment, you can click the hand icon, typically at the bottom of your WebEx screen. Are there any comments? I do not see any requests. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, this might be the fastest board meeting we're about to have. I'm like, what is happening right now? Okay, let's move to agenda item 7, intergovernmental relations report and administrative services update. And we have a DC representative with us, Judy Bucciarelli. Did I say that right? Okay. Staff services manager, board and bureau relations.
Good morning. How's that? Can everyone hear? Okay, perfect. Good morning, President Pines and board members. My name is Judy Bucciarelli from the California Department of Consumer Affairs, Board and Bureau Relations, and I thank you for the opportunity to join you this morning. Before I begin, I was prepared to present an item on the governor's executive order N1525 related to the wildfires. But Executive Director Erica Calderon will be covering that in her report in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Okay, to start, I'd like to share Governor's 25-26 proposed state budget update. Governor Newsom released his proposed 2025-26 state budget on January 10th, which included 8 budget change proposals for DCA's boards and bureaus. Additionally, DCA's vacancy reduction and government efficiency plans were approved by the Department of Finance and may be made official in the spring revisions. The governor remains committed to funding resources to address California's housing and homelessness crisis. Included in the governor's proposed budget is the creation of a dedicated California Housing and Homeless Agency. The Department of Consumer Affairs and other regulators currently under the Business and Consumer Services and Housing Agency would form a consumer protection agency. This is an extraordinary opportunity for DCA to better align with other consumer protection entities as one consumer protection agency. With the Consumer Protection Agency Secretary within the Governor's Cabinet, this is an exciting opportunity that will only strengthen our mission, momentum, and delivery of services to California. The governor's reorganization proposal would be reviewed by the nonpartisan Little Hoover Commission and the legislature in the spring. As more information is available, DCA will continue to keep board leadership updated. Next, I have an update related to Form 700 filing changes that became effective on January 1st. The governor signed AB 1170, which requires board members to file their Form 700s electronically with the Fair Political Practice Commission, which I'll refer to as the FPPC, using the FPPC's electronic filing system. Effective January 1st of this year, DCA board members must file Form 700s through the FPPC's online system. Filings will no longer be filed via the NetFile portal that DCA board members have been using for many years. Additionally, paper filings will no longer be accepted. On January 2nd of this year, the FPPC emailed all board members with a link to the portal and login information. As a reminder, the annual Form 700 filing deadline is Tuesday, April 1st, 2025. If you have any questions, please contact Board and Bureau Relations regarding the new requirements, and that email address is memberrelations@dca.ca.gov. Moving on, I have an update for this year's annual President's Training. DCA invites presidents and vice presidents to attend our annual President's Training on February 19th from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. This virtual training is for board members who are new to the role of president or vice president and those who have served in the role for a year or more. The training will review the role of a board president, communication best practices with the executive officer and board members, as well as the president's administrative duties. It will also include a panel of prior board members who will share their knowledge and expertise and answer questions from attendees. Learning from each other is a large part of this training, and we look forward to seeing all presidents and vice presidents. Please register online using DCA's Learning Management System, which is also referred to as LMS. Next, I have a update about the Board and Bureau Relations team. Yvonne Durantes served as Assistant Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Relations since October of 2022. On December 6th, the governor appointed Yvonne as the Assistant Deputy Director of Legislative and Government Affairs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Yvonne's last day with DCA was December 31st. We appreciate her dedication to the Board and Bureau Relations team and wish her well in her new role. And to close, I have a message from the director. Director Kirchmeyer would like to thank the board and staff for their hard work and partnership last year. She is excited about 2025 and the many opportunities that await us. She also would like to express appreciation and thanks to the board and staff for their dedicated service that protects California consumers every day. This concludes my report today. I appreciate your time this morning, and at this time, I'll turn the floor back to Board President Pines and welcome any questions from the board.
Great, thank you. I have a question just about the 700 form.
Yes.
What about for people who actually filled it out early, like in January?
Okay,
So
so
they have to do it again?
yes, the deadline to file using NetFile was December 31st. So if you happen to have, actually done it in NetFile on
Okay,
or after January 1st, you would need to use the FPPC's filing system.
okay.
So did you file through NetFile?
Yeah, I did do it through
Yeah.
net file.
So if it wasn't before December 31st, you will need to do that again.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, perfect, okay. Does any other members have questions or comments, please?
I also submitted a 700 not too long ago again, but I couldn't tell you right now what system I did it on or if I'm up to date. So I would appreciate it if somebody could let me know if I am in arrears on that.
Judy, if I may step in, I actually emailed all of the members that still require to file theirs last night. So
Okay.
those of you that received an email from me, those are the ones that were missing. If you didn't receive an email, we're good to go.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Perfect. Any other comments or, yes?
But in that email, it linked us to the old link.
Correct.
Oh.
So I think, yeah, we'll just have you file the correct way, Dr.
Okay. Perfect. Are there any, oh, that's okay. Any other comments from members of the board? Any comments from members in the audience? Moderator, are there any comments from the public online?
This is the moderator. If anyone has a comment, you may look for the hand icon, typically at the bottom of the WebEx screen or behind the 3-dot other options if you're on a mobile device. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. Are there any comments? I do not see any requests. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I appreciate it. Thanks. Good to see you again. And now we have, what do we have? Oh, we have DCA's budget office, and we have Kristen Cox on, yes? Okay. And Harmony Del Filippo.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good
Thank you,
morning.
Madam. Thank you, Madam President Pines, and good morning. My name is Kirsten Cox, and I am the budget analyst with the DCA Budget Office, and I am joined with the budget manager, Harmony De Filippo. I want to thank the board and the executive staff for allowing me a few minutes to present on agenda item 7B, the board's expenditure projections and fund conditions statement. First, I'm going to start with the board's expenditures, attachment 7B, page 1 of your materials. These projections are based on actual data through fiscal month 5. The reports include 23-24 actual expenditures in green, as well as 24-25 budgeted and projected expenditures in blue and orange. As we move to the end of the document, you will see the board had a beginning base budget of $4.235 million and is projected to spend a little over $4 million, creating a reversion to the board's fund of approximately $165,000, a reversion percentage of 3.84%. The next document I will be going over is the board's revenue projections, attachment 7B, page 2 of your materials. This report includes receipts collected through November and projected revenue to year end. I will go further into the projections as we transition to the next slide. The next document is attachment 7B, page 3 of your materials. This is the board's fund condition statement. As a reminder, we read this document from top to bottom, left to right. The left column is the board's prior year 23-24 actuals. It shows the board began 23-24 with the beginning base balance of $4.622 million, collected $3.94 million in revenues with $1.423 million from initial license fees, $2.233 million from license renewals, and $284,000 was collected from the issuance of citations, fines, delinquent fees, and other revenue. The board expended $3.512 million, which includes 239 indirect draws to the fund for statewide pro rata and pension payments. The board ended 23-24 with $5.05 million reserve balance, or about 14.7 months in reserve. For current year 24-25, the board projects revenues of $3.836 million with $1.197 million projected from initial license fees, $2.457 million from renewal fees, and $182,000 from the issuance of citations, fines, delinquent fees, and other revenue. The board's 24-25 expenditures are based on the governor's budget with FM5 projections at $4.133 million between authorized expenditures and direct draws to the fund, leaving the board with a fund balance of approximately $4.8 million or 12.3 months in reserve. The Budget Office will continue to monitor the board's revenue and expenditures and report back to the board with monthly expenditure projections as we continue to close fiscal months in the current fiscal year. A few things to note on the board's fund condition. The fund condition is a snapshot in time. One of the main factors driving expenditure increases in future years is a result of personal service adjustments. These include general salary increases as well as employee compensation and retirement rate adjustments. The Budget Office includes a conservative ongoing 3% increase to expenditures on the fund condition statement to account for these ongoing incremental adjustments. You'll also notice revenue is projected static in the out years. Lastly, I would like to note to the board that any future legislation or unanticipated events could result in the board's need for additional resources, which could create cost pressure on the fund. The Budget Office will continue to monitor the board's fund condition statement and keep the line of communication with the board's executive staff open for any future needs or expectations. Again, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present at today's meeting, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Do any members have any questions about the
Yes,
budget?
I do. Why is the number of months in reserve going down as we go into 2025, 2025, 2026? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So why is the months in reserve going down as the years progress?
Yes, you got
Hi,
it.
this is Harmony. Yes, I got it. So if you'll notice on the fund condition statement in the bottom section where it's looking at expenditures, it's budgeted for the board to spend to their full appropriation. However, if the board does not spend to their full appropriation, there's additional savings that go in. But the other factor you'll notice is that the revenues coming in are less than the expenditures going out. So there's a structural imbalance there. And so that's the other factor of why you're seeing those months in reserve decline over through those out years. However, again, if the board does not spend to their full appropriation, then you'll end up with more months in reserve, but that's something that's updated on a fiscal month basis, an annual basis. There's other factors that can play a role into things changing, kind of how Kirsten mentioned, any unanticipated costs that may be due to legislation could also increase cost pressures on the fund.
Thank you.
Harmony, if I may step in a little bit here also to assist with that question. A couple of the things that are factoring in are the added positions that we just received not long ago with the 815, the 2 enforcement analysts. Those are, playing a part in this. Also, the fact that we're, moving along more enforcement cases to the AG's office. But to help with that in the future, we do have that regulatory packet where we are looking to increase our fees to bring in a little bit more revenue in our application component. And we work with the budget's office, on a monthly basis. I talk to them all the time. We're monitoring it very closely, but just, for awareness, that regulatory packet is really going to help us bring in revenue in the next couple of years. But the added positions also support help on a limited term basis that I did bring over for the last 2 years. Our retired annuitant who's been helping in the area of the regulation component. That has also been a factor as well for the expenditures to be a little higher than they were, a couple of years ago.
Thank you for the clarity. It was just a substantial decline from 14.7 to 5 months. That's why I brought it up. Thank you.
Are there any more comments from members of the board? Are there any comments from members in the audience? Any comments from moderator? Any comments from members of the public online?
If anyone has a comment on the budget report, you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and that's to the bottom of your WebEx screen, or if you're on a mobile device, behind the 3-dot other options. Are there any comments on the budget? I do not see any comments. Shall I close that feature?
Yes.
Thank you.
Christian and Harmony, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Of course, thank you.
Moving to agenda item 8, we are going to have a presentation on the aging brain. Oh, is it virtual? Oh, okay. I don't have his bio, do I? Dr. Reamer is a DO, a professor at Touro University Medical Group, and I am really looking forward to this presentation. Dr. Reamer, we have been waiting a long time, so I'm hoping this is going to knock our socks off. You can begin.
So much. I'm not sure it's going to knock socks off, but I wanted to thank the board for the opportunity. It's nice to see some of you again. I'm sorry I am in my clinic and hopefully not being disturbed during my presentation. I was asked to give a talk about the aging brain, and I think we could bring up the slides unless there was a way that you wanted me to do that.
I did make you a presenter, Dr. Reamer, so you should be able to advance through the slides yourself.
Okay.
The controls are above the center. There's a 01 and then an arrow to the right, which will move them forward.
Did not see that.
Okay, you should be in your WebEx screen, not in your PowerPoint presentation mode.
Right, I'm in WebEx.
Okay, above the presentation, there's a sharing, revised normal aging brain, and just next to that is the 01.
What I'm looking at is a picture of all of you and me.
Oh, goodness. Okay, let me make sure. Let me synchronize our displays so that you see what the rest of us are seeing. Did that come through more clearly?
No, it did not. Yeah, all I'm looking at is are the board members through the camera and myself and you, Ms. Fisher. Oh, would you like me to share my screen? That may be
Whatever.
another way.
Yeah, that's another way, or you can just simply ask us to move it to the next slide.
I'll
Whatever
share
you
my
prefer.
screen and be with you in just a moment. Let's see if I'm
Certainly.
able to do this for you.
Yeah, there's a share button, and then on the left-hand column is this, you can share your screen.
Okay. You see that?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, just by quick background, I am Dr. Richard Reamer, and I am a professor of clinical neurology, formerly at UC Davis, and for almost the past 10 years now at Touro University. I'm the program director for the St. Joseph's Medical Center Neurology Residency. I'm talking to you close to the hospital here in Stockton. I'm also the chief medical officer for Touro University's faculty practice, where we help support resident and student learning with 9 residencies and 4 fellowships just south of Sacramento, and also still play the role as the Senior Associate Dean at Touro University. So by disclaimer, when I was asked to give this talk, I explained that I am not a specialist in this area, but as an educator and somebody who continues to see patients, I feel comfortable, particularly having taught some of these items and topics over the years, to present you with a very fast overview. My understanding is I've got about 30 minutes and twice that number of slides. So I'm going to move relatively quickly as I talk about this.
Dr. Reamer, I'm
yes.
sorry, this is Erica. If we can ask for you to put your camera on, because we see a blank screen for you.
For me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
How's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Well, why talk about the normal aging brain? And we'll chat a little bit about that, but I'd like to share with you some of the complaints that I experience when I walk into patient rooms in the hospital or in the clinic. I go into a room and can't remember why. How often is that happening to some of us with gray beards? I now have to make a grocery list or I forget items. I didn't have to do that when I was younger. I've met my boss's wife numerous times in the past. I was so embarrassed when I couldn't remember her name, particularly at the holiday parties. And someone took my parking space. So I parked my car in a different location. I was so upset. And at the end of the day, I could not remember where I parked the car. These are complaints that flow into neurologists' offices, and it usually prompts a lot of anxiety as patients are concerned that potentially they have a neurodegenerative disease. So the reason for studying the normal aging brain is that there is an inflection point where normal aging changes in cognition and structure overlap overlap and tip over to pathologic states like Alzheimer's disease. And by understanding some of those cognitive and structural changes, we're able to then identify as a reference point when we need to be concerned and do further workups for patients. And so trying to identify what's normal and what is a disease is important. So I'm old enough to remember that most of the information that we had learned about structural changes of the brain were posthumous studies looking at folks who had passed away and recognizing that their brains looked different than a healthier and younger adult. And it wasn't until advances in brain imaging in the 1980s that we were now able to identify or look at populations of patients and single patients in vivo, meaning that they're alive. And we'll talk about some of those tools. but you may be imagining that these are things like MRI scan and CT scan. I was at UC Davis back in the 1980s when the first MRI scanner in Northern California, maybe the state, made its arrival. And when I started my training in medical school, there were no MRI scans and CT scans. And consequently, the introduction of this and the advances in the technology and greater understanding of the use of these tools began to open up this field for evolutionary biologists, neuroscientists, epidemiologists, and so forth as to what's happening to our brain as we get older. This field is not very old, and some of the major studies that began to take a look at both cognitive and structural changes of the brain really started in the 2000s. I want to mention that some of these earlier studies differed by methodologic design. There are cross-sectional studies which look at a single individual over time, a single individual at a point in time, and compare that to other individuals who might be the same age. And it's through that process of looking at that entire cohort that we are able to take a look at cognitive changes and structural changes. That's very different from some of the more recent studies that are longitudinal studies that actually follow an individual throughout their lifetime. And if we have enough of those individuals in a cohort, we're able to make even more accurate assessments as to how the brain is changing and what cognitive function looks like. So there are limitations in both of these designs, but it's what we use. And depending on who enters into these studies, there's something called cohort bias. And what I want to mention is that it's very difficult to actually identify individuals with healthy aging brains, particularly in advanced countries. The amount of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, exposure to pollutants, it can be diet, genetics, and so forth. Finding that pristine brain is pretty difficult. So there tends to be cohort bias when we're looking at different populations of different ethnicities, parts of the country, socioeconomic factors that influence these results. Why this is becoming much more important is something that you could appreciate if you were reviewing the number of referrals into our clinic. Probably 50% of referrals are for the evaluation of patients with cognitive impairment. And this was a disease that by and large was ignored in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s because of the lifespan changes that have occurred to us as humans with advances in medicine and science. These are the number of older adults that you can see increasing relatively rapidly compared to children. I personally am in that orange. And you can see that the projections show a continued increase in the number of aging adults. And consequently, we're entering into a stage that in neuroscience that is itself is imposing because of the number of patients that we'll be seeing with an increased number of neurodegenerative diseases in our population. So between 2020 and 2060, the number of adults is projected to increase by 69% of older adults. And you can see by 2060, the number will be 94.7 million in a country of over 400 million. And although much smaller in total size, the number of people aging 85 and older is projected to triple by 2016 to 19 million. So again, underscoring the scope, the mere scope of this problem and what we're dealing with in neuroscience and clinically in neurology. And this more or less heat map, if you will, looks at counties across the United States and shows that the continued increase in this population is occurring predominantly in the West and the South, as you can see from the Northwest to California, Arizona, and then in Florida and portions of Texas. So these are the fastest growing counties with the fastest growing aging populations. So The definition of old is a conceptual definition. Back in 1935, when Social Security was developed, actuaries reviewed retirement norms and set 65 as the official retirement age because most people didn't live to 65. The average life expectancy was 62. And so it was safe that Social Security was always going to have a large repository of funds for those people lucky enough to live beyond the average lifespan. But that point has changed in the subsequent decades, as you're aware, with men and women now with average lifespans that are extending into the upper 70s and low 80s, and certainly for single individuals beyond. So there's now a changing perspective where 60 years old, we thought of that person as senile, but currently we all say this to ourselves and across the dinner table: age is just a number, and or 70 70 is the new 60, and it's because of those advances. So how accurate is that in reality? So I'd like to share with you this slope of cognitive decline, which is what we believed existed only up until 10 to 20 years ago. This is from Joel Kramer's work at UCSF. And you could see this gradual decline in what's called delayed recall, that ability to be presented with information and recall it moments later. And this showed a decline. Of course, you can see after age 60, this appears to be a slope that suggests a pessimistic picture. But what I'd like to do is show you the points of all of these points representing single individuals that made up that slope. This is called a linear regression analysis. And by a statistical method, one can see that there are individuals who actually retain the same cognitive function as those who are decades younger than them. So at the very top right, you can see a person at age 90 whose cognitive function is no different then than it was when that individual, or comparatively to a person at age 20. This is a very important slide because what you've asked me to do today is to talk about the normal aging brain. But I'm not sure that normal is a correct word because this varies amongst individuals. And it points to the fact that when there is cognitive decline, that an evaluation of that individual compared to reference points, or what we think is normal, is most important to identify if that individual is progressing to a neurodegenerative process, or whether what we're looking at is actually anticipated based on some of the changes to brain structure and some of the cognitive functions that correlate with that. This is a scatter plot. You could see that this looks like pickup sticks, and each of these lines is an individual. If we again did a regression analysis, we actually see 4 types of groups that make up these changes across a population. You could see a group that early in life actually improves in that group 4, followed by a slow decline in cognitive function. You can see a group 3, which continues to improve over time into older age. And then there's group 2, the yellow line. And that's the line that we think of in terms of individuals reaching that inflection point somewhere between time 2 and time 3, where their cognitive function continues to deteriorate over time. These are individuals likely affected by neurodegenerative processes, which we won't get into in any depth. That group 1 is a group of individuals who have never had a very high cognitive function, and yet you can see that other than that dip at time 3, they maintain this. And what we know comparing group 4 and group 1 is that there's a relative protection in decline of cognitive function based on good health. So those individuals who have higher educational experiences, have attended school, continue to study, individuals with fewer cardiovascular risk factors, that exercise all the time, that never smoke, that limit the amount of alcohol, they form the, by and large, that group that's most protected in group 4. So the idea, of course, from a neuroscience and research standpoint, is to look for that inflection point and go backwards. Because where the circle is, all the way back in the 20s and 30s, this is the point where individuals begin to diverge. And what neuroscientists are doing now is looking at those biomarkers, those things both structurally and chemically, and based on imaging studies that differentiate who's going to be protected in the red, green, or yellow lines relatively compared to the blue line. So I'd like to also mention that this is sort of an epidemic of aging, tongue-in-cheek, and that individuals older than age 70, there is going to be dementia identified in 14% of them. But of course, that means that 86% of people are not demented at that age. But the dementias do increase over time as from decade to decade as individuals get older. So a few take-home points from this brief introduction is that a decline in cognition with age and brain is not inevitable, and there is considerable variability in how much and how fast any single individual will develop cognitive decline. Age-related declines in cognition and brain structure and function are typically the result of a pathologic process. And today, we're not going to be talking about those pathologic processes, but some of the observations we make structurally and functionally in all of us who are growing older, but continue to consider that normal, and some of the mechanisms that preserve that function. And the better we understand these processes, the better equipped we are to do something about it, which is why there are scientists studying the normal aging brain. So it feels like my lifetime teaching and learning about neuroscience and neuroanatomy, and I'm going to give you a crash course in 2 slides. And so what I'd like to do is on the left show you what the lateral surface of the brain looks like, and on the right, the medial surface. And you could see that we divide the brain into these particular 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobes. And for those of us in neuroscience, we know this is a very simplification of the many different processes that exist within these lobes, and through networks connecting these lobes through white matter tracks, how they interrelate and accomplish all the things and activities that we do, which make us us. You'll see, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, the cauliflower-looking brain, if you will, with its dips, which are called the sulci, and the edges, which are called the gyri. And we want to keep that in mind as we talk about some of the pathology. Here's a MRI scan that is a slice through the brain. And I'm showing this slide more to concentrate on the left side so that you can see a differentiation between the gray matter and white matter. Gray matter is the location of all of the cells of the brain. There are cells located in other subcortical structures, but most of what we talk about today will be focusing on these gray matters. There's 6 layers of molecular layers that make up the gray matter of the brain. And you can see that ribbon that forms around it. The white matter are the projections of the axons which originate from those neurons. And it looks white because they're surrounded by a fat called myelin. And this communicates between hemispheres, within hemispheres, and descends down to other structures in the stem of the brain and the spinal cord, which allow us to act on our thoughts and respond to stimuli. So we're going to take a brief tour of the structure of the brain, and then we'll be talking a little bit more about function. So you just saw an MRI scan, and I want to talk about 3 of the more common tools that have been used, particularly since really only about 2005, when some of the most seminal papers began to be published regarding the normal aging brain. So an MRI scan, what this does is uses properties of physics, and I'm not going to get into that to any extent, but each of these are sequences, T1, T2, and flare images, and you can see those off on the right side. We looked earlier at a T1 weighted image, which gives us the greatest delineation of demarcation between the gray matter and white matter. The T2 weighted image turns that all fluids into a signal that looks white. So you see the difference on the scan between the ventricles, which are the cerebral spinal fluid containing structures. These are the canal structures where fluid is produced, circulates through the brain, and ultimately on top of the brain to be reabsorbed. And the flare image, which suppresses that high intensity image of the ventricles, which you see in the middle. So the flare image is used to look for abnormal white matter accumulations in the white matter itself. The functional MRI scan has been available to us for about 25 years, continues to be sophisticated. This is based on the principle that neurons or cells that are metabolically active require oxygen as part of their energy scheme, something called oxidative phosphorylation, in order to generate the energy compounds necessary to carry out activities. And in doing this, oxygen is taken up by the cell and it's metabolized, and carbon dioxide is released. And it is bound to hemoglobin, which circulates throughout the blood. The functional MRI scan is an actual measure of that process of oxygen converting to carbon dioxide, and it creates these images. And you can see the red and yellow images, which correspond to areas of the brain that are metabolically more active than other areas. So if I told you in the functional MRI scanner to wiggle your left finger, I would see an increased activity in the right area of the premotor cortex, which corresponds to that somatic representation of the finger. We're watching the brain actually turn on and move the finger. The default mode is, talk a little bit about that, but this is when an individual is in the MRI scanner and is completely relaxed and not performing an activity. This default mode network is the connections that we see between inactive areas of the brain. And so we just looked at resting state and task performance. And then the PET scan, positive emission transmission, is a way that we can also measure metabolic activity of the brain. We can measure that based on glucose metabolism. And now we have special radionuclide scans, radioisotope scans that allow us to target abnormal proteins that collect in the brain. So we use this for diagnostic purposes. All of this is giving us information when we compare that normal individual to somebody who's having cognitive difficulties. So we're going to talk briefly about the morphologic changes of the brain. And we all are aware probably of the term atrophy, which is that global loss of brain volume. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about that cortical thinning. That's the ribbon of gray matter that you can see. It's number 2 on the right. We'll talk about white matter degradation and how that is translated into cognitive difficulties. The simplification or loss of the folding of the brain called gyrification, and the enlargement of those CSF-containing canals, the ventricular system, and what some of that does. So global volume changes. Over the lifetime of an individual, we know that the brain grows up until about age 9, and between 9 and 13, there begins to be a relative shrinkage of the brain. This is nothing to be scared of. This is something that just indicates that the brain is continuing to mature. Areas that are less important and not being recruited as much lose some connectivity, other areas grow in connectivity. And so there's a relative loss of volume. Early in adulthood is a period of insignificant volume growth or barely a change in volume. But after the age of 35, annual total brain volume begins to reduce by about 0.2% and increases at age 60 to about 0.5%. do want to point out there are a number of studies. I've selected those that I think best represent the data, but there are studies that vary. But this is the trend, that by age 60, we start to see an acceleration of global brain atrophy. And you could see in the final bullet that cerebral atrophy in the elderly who are not demented increases up to 0.45% up till age 90. So there is a considerable acceleration of loss of brain volume. And yet, I can see that 90-year-old on that dot who comes into my office, referring to the linear regression slide that I showed earlier, whose brain on an MRI or a CT scan might look quite small, and yet this person is functioning normally. So while structural changes are a biomarker and a surrogate for cognitive impairment, there isn't a one-to-one correlation. This paper by my colleague at UC Davis, colleagues at UC Davis, Dr. Larcott and Dr. DeCarli, came out in 2005, and this was the largest cross-sectional study that is still referenced to this day. And the importance of this study, as you think about all those four areas of the large lobes of the brain, the parietal, occipital, temporal, and frontal, what this study showed is that while there's a reduction in brain volume, it's not symmetric and the same in all of the lobes. So the frontal lobe is most affected, and its volume decreases by 12% throughout the age of this cohort, from age 34 to 90%. The temporal lobe atrophies about 9%, while the occipital and parietal lobes don't atrophy particularly. And there's certainly diseases where we see atrophy there. So why is this significant? Well, it's significant because it's based on some of the foundational functions of these particular lobes. We'll be talking about memory, which involves the temporal lobe, many different types of memory, and I'll review that, and the frontal lobe, which also includes what's called working memory and executive functions. And so we know that the reduction or deterioration in individuals with short-term memory problems, working memory problems, which I'll describe to you, executive dysfunctions, changes in personality, difficulty with selective attention, easy distractibility, all of these things correlate with the changes anatomically in the temporal and temporal and frontal lobe. The other thing that we see is that ribbon of gray matter getting thinner. And we have a pretty steep slope of that. It looks pretty good up until the third decade of life, when we, again, start to see some regional differences. This talk has been given to medical students and physicians. I won't go into the anatomy particularly, but the entorhinal cortex communicates with an area in the mesial temporal lobe called the hippocampus, and a loss of volume and atrophy in these areas contributes to some of the short-term and working memory problems and encoding of new information that can occur with age. So this shows you the deep blue and purple shows a relatively healthy brain between the ages of 3 and 29. It correlates again to those lobes of the brain, and you can see the changes that occur over time with thinning of that cortex. The white matter volume also begins to decline. And interestingly, the decline in the white matter volume starts to occur different from the gray matter, which started by age 30 or 35. This starts at age 40 to 50. This, again, is those myelinated tracks that arise from the neurons that are descending through the brain to ultimately the spinal cord and other deep structures. These are the communication tracks and the networks. They're the cabling system. And their decline starts between about age 40 and 50, and then accelerates to the point that by around age 70, it's declining at a rate faster than the gray matter. Why is this important? Well, it appears that a decline in the cabling system probably isn't much different than the circuitry problems you might have with Wi-Fi or the speed of processing information. So this is the speed of the processor. And we see with greater white matter changes, processing information gets slower. It doesn't necessarily get slower to the point of causing problems with daily function, with work, but it does get slower. And so there is a correlation between that, thinking, and motor performance. This beautiful slide on the right is taken from a diffusion-weighted image. This is corticography. These are all of the different beautiful white matter tracks that have been subtracted from the gray matter that shows you the complexity of the brain and the circuitry. There's an alteration in the white matter architecture. White matter can lose the insulation. We call that demyelination, and it can be affected by a variety of pathologies that we're not going to talk about today, but it includes things like small strokes or larger strokes, impairment of the circulation, both the venous and arterial circulation, and things that cause increased inflammation of the brain, which ages the white matter. This can occur, for instance, increased inflammation in a normal aging brain. Demyelination can occur in a normal aging brain, but at a rate that's slower than the person with pathology. Here's the ventricular system, and you can see it quite enlarged in this slide. And the ventricles themselves continue to enlarge with age because of the changes of the cells that line this system, the changes to the structures and white matter structures that surround it, creating a pressure gradient that allows these ventricles to enlarge. And this too can result when it enlarges and causes pressure in some cognitive changes, but it's a typical finding that we see in a brain where the gray matter and the white matter begin to deteriorate, and the ventricles in kind compensate by increasing in size. So we also see that the ventricles become less efficient in turning over the fluid or the cerebral spinal fluid. A healthy young adult in a single day will circulate their cerebral spinal fluid throughout this entire system 6 times, compared to less than 2 times in somebody over the age of 65 to 70 or 80. So again, a normal aging mechanism that we see. The gyrification, which is this infolding and outfolding of the brain surface, also changes as there becomes simplification of this folding in and out, and the depth and spacing between the sulci also change. Sulci become more shallow and spaces increase. The space between the sulci increase. This too can be seen in a normal brain. Of course, it's hard to say at what point in delineation, when I'm seeing a patient and I'm looking at their scan, I can see these changes, and yet that individual is communicating with me normally and appears to be functioning normally. So there's this overlap, and that's something that I'm obviously emphasizing to all of you. Something called the gyrification index. Not going to go too much in depth, but this is comparing the surface area of the brain to the contour of the brain. And this is an index that's used in order to evaluate whether the brain folding is being simplified. And we can see that there is a simplification based on measurement of the gyrification index with an aging brain. The brain folding changes, I've already mentioned that as we age, the depth becomes shallower in the canyons, while the mountains, the distance between them continues to increase. And this correlates very well with that gyrification index. But these brain folding changes also correlate strongly with cognitive changes with age. Here's the ventricular enlargement, a quick slide to just show you visually what's occurring to these ventricles and the reasons that they are occurring as the brain ages based on vascular changes, changes in degeneration of the axons adjacent to it, a loss of the white matter, and I alluded to that. On the picture below, you can see a normal size lateral ventricle, and ventricles when they're enlarged. The layman term sometimes I hear is, "Doc, I've got water on my brain." This is called hydrocephalus, or the enlargement of the ventricles. And here you can see how it correlates with age, where the volume increases, as I said, almost 5 times after the age of 70. So the old theories, and again, this really doesn't date back all that long, 25, 30, 35 years, is that the aging process was associated with aging of the neuron itself. And what you're looking at, particularly in age 20, you can see what looks like a very healthy neuron. At the base is the soma, or the cell. It gives rise to that vertical stalk, which is the axon, which is surrounded by the fat or the myelin, and then branches into dendrites, these little trees or twigs. And it was thought that the neuron shriveled with age, and that this was responsible for what we see to account for the atrophy. But what we've learned is that we're completely wrong, and that the number of neurons that you're born with remains pretty stable throughout your lifetime. You may lose up to 10% of your total neurons, but what has changed is the connections between the neurons. And these are the connections that allow neurons to communicate with each other between the dendrites, the cell bodies, and the axons. They become simplified and less complicated. And as a consequence, it's the communication and the structure of these components that result in some of the atrophy that we see in the brain. So in terms of the gray matter aging, we now know that it's not just neuronal loss. And I think this slide illustrates this, since the gray matter is not just neurons, but it's other cells, supportive cells we call the glial cells, blood vessels, the axons and the dendrites. The cell bodies themselves and the blood vessels make up 16% of that gray matter. So it's not a loss of neurons that accounts for this. So the notion that the leading cause of gray matter atrophy is due to neuron cell death in healthy aging is now challenged. And you could see that the total number of neurons overall in a lifetime, the loss, would account for only 10%. So now we're going to jump over to structure a little bit and talk a little bit about cognitive function and what occurs in normal aging. It's impossible to do this without a review of what are called the cognitive domains. And these are the areas of brain processing that are shared and localized within the various lobes of the brain and subcortical structures. And I've already alluded to a little bit processing speed, but we talk about attention and memory and language and visual spatial abilities and executive functioning. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these relative to what is normal and what happens a little bit with aging. When an individual comes into an office with cognitive impairment, these are the tests that we're giving, whether it's a neuropsychologist or a neurologist. This is how we think. And this is the scheme and the analytic process that we go through to identify if an individual has normal brain aging or they've passed that inflection point and now have developed conditions that result in mild or more severe cognitive impairment. So let's talk about attention a little bit. There are a number of different types of attention, and briefly, what you're doing now is selecting your attention on me, and hopefully with phones off and nobody creating any other distractors in your environment, you're able to concentrate on me. And this selective focus, or this part of attention, is something that occurs through a network called the frontal parietal network. And it's largely a function in that frontal lobe, in an area that is most anterior or rostral in the frontal lobe. That means way in front, called the prefrontal cortex. And there are changes in attention that occur as we grow older. If we compare our ability to attend to objects or activities compared to a younger person, by and large, we're able to keep up. And we're keeping up not because when we compare the function of a younger adult, we see that they're recruiting that prefrontal cortex in a very robust way, particularly on the left side. As an older adult, we begin to rely on bilateral or both sides of the prefrontal cortex to make up for that. And we have other compensatory mechanisms. So if I were to do a functional imaging study and look at an older adult, I would see that their brain is not operating the same way as a younger adult. But if I compare their performance to a task, they do just as well in a normal aging brain. The difference, however, is that if I introduce into the environment many distractors that you can see on the right side of the screen, I'm using we as since I'm now an older adult, we won't perform quite as well. The same thing occurs with multitasking. That ability to divide your attention with competing stimuli in your environment becomes harder as you get older. Finding a quiet environment in order to selectively attend is much easier than it is with multitasking. So talking on the phone while cooking, I will tell you I work in a very distracting environment, and it's a challenge when I'm in an ICU and the bells are ringing and the ventilator is going off. I know the doctors on the board can relate to all of this, or the emergency room. It takes quite a lot of energy. That also leads to another point with attention, is that we expend more energy, cognitive energy, metabolic energy, to accomplish the same tasks, to perform at the same level as a younger adult in a competing environment. So those are some of the changes that occur. And we're a little bit worse in working memory. I'm going to talk to you about working memory in a moment. There are many different types of memory. It is a very complex neuroanatomic area. It is subserved by many different areas of the brain, but we focus predominantly on medial aspects of the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is behind the ears and this prefrontal cortex. And we already talked about the fact that with might matter changes with normal aging, processing speed changes. There's a reduced ability to ignore irrelevant information that's competing for your attention, that shiny penny that you want to pay attention to, and a bit of the decreased use of those strategies to improve learning and memory, which occurs in normal aging. There are a number of different types of memory. I'm going to just briefly touch on this since their functions live in different areas. There's immediate and working memory, which is the prefrontal cortex, and I'm going to take a moment and talk about that. The prefrontal cortex working memory function allows you to hold on to 4 to 7 pieces of information at any time, and then use that information, almost holding it in your RAM like a computer, and compare it to information that you have already stored and encoded and are now retrieving in your long-term memory, as well as compare it to information that you're being presented with at this moment, so that you have the ability to prioritize, organize, plan, abstract reason with all the information that you're holding in the RAM or the working memory. It's interesting. I think back to Alexander Graham Bell. There's a reason that telephone numbers were 7 digits long. That's about the most a human being can hold in working memory before, without rehearsing it, they lose that memory trace. That is not memory that is being encoded and placed into long-term memory. The prefrontal cortex, as we saw from an earlier slide, the prefrontal and frontal cortex undergoes the most rapid decline in structure, and consequently, there is a correlation between the challenges with working memory and aging in a normal adult. We'll talk briefly about declarative and non-declarative memory. Declarative, this is the processing speed, which we already talked about. Declarative and non-declarative memory. Declarative memory is explicit. This is the memory that is autobiographical when it's episodic. It is contextual. You remember the day of your wedding or your first day of medical school, those important events that you place into memory. Maybe you remember this past Thanksgiving and literally what you ate. That is episodic memory. It gives you information about what makes you you, compared to semantic memory, which is information about all of the facts of the world, the fact that you can remember that George Washington was the first president. It's non-contextual. It's what you've memorized in school. It's what you rehearse and repeat. Declarative memory is a function of the temporal lobes in a particular structure called the hippocampus. Non-declarative memory is what you learn without paying much attention. It may be practicing your tennis swing. It may be also the fact that you climb in a car and know how to drive it. These are the rote skills that you use every day. The brain is amazing that it doesn't have to pull up those motor integrated tasks in order to get through a day. You don't have to relearn how to drive your car every time you get into it or every time you swing a racket. And also non-declarative memory that is emotional. So immediate and working memory, we check for this in various ways, but that person who goes into the grocery store and fails to make a list and thinks they're going to remember it, that may be normal aging. The person who placed that car in a parking lot and didn't pay attention could be normal aging. We can ask a person to hold on to information and spell a word backwards. This is one way that we can test it. Calculating a tip, visualizing what a couch would look like if I were to move it. This is the visual sketch pad, all of these using immediate and working memory. Some of these things normally deteriorating slowly as we get older. This is a slide of the implicit memory. You'll all remember Pavlov in the beginning, in the middle of this slide. When the dog is presented with red meat, it salivates. We have these types of classical conditioning that occur to us. It's the anxiety you might feel before giving a lecture to the Osteopathic Medical Board of California. These are just the unconscious reactions, and operant conditioning, which is the positive and negative reinforcement that occurs unconsciously. And these things generally are well preserved with aging. The explicit memory, the facts, knowledge, we often tell people, can you tell me how many pieces of fruit that you can think of, or how many colors you can remember, or how many words begin with the letter F? This requires, as you can see on the screen here, temporal lobe function, and the autobiographical information as well as part of that temporal lobe. Temporal lobe also degenerating over time. These are the stages of memory that occur in that temporal lobe and mesial temporal area, encoding information, storing it, and then retrieving it. And you often find people who have these difficulties with even with normal aging, and we're still trying to figure out at which point is that abnormal. We do have tests that have reference points for this on the neurologic and neuropsychological tests that say, yes, this can confirm to us that there are these difficulties. I wanted to show you the hippocampus. It's an amazing part of the brain in the mesial temporal lobe. It's the gateway to the memory system, and it's what ultimately helps as a gate to identifying relevant information, encoding it, and placing it into long-term storage, where other parts of the brain, controlled by the prefrontal cortex, retrieve that information. Damage can produce severe amnesia, the ability to learn and remember new experiences, and spatial memory will be affected. And that's where a person puts down their cell phone and is spending 3 hours looking for it. We all can do this with the normal aging brain, but these are some of the changes that are more obvious with hippocampal damage. There was a cute study that was done in 1997. This is London, and taxi drivers, in order to obtain a license in London, have to have a spatial map of every landmark and every part and every street in the city. And this study took a look using PET scans at the size of the hippocampus. And it saw that in taxi drivers, as compared to bus drivers, that the hippocampus itself was enlarged. So the hippocampus is literally, we talk about the things you can do with healthy aging and how to preserve these areas. This is an example of the use of the brain over time. It is the reserve that we have in our brains from remaining cognitively active so that these important areas for memory can remain structurally intact and continue to function. So here you see peak activation of the right hippocampus when drivers recalled their routes through London streets. And a later study compared them to bus drivers that showed that their hippocampus were less active and didn't have the same increase in size. So the number of years that you do this correlated well with hippocampal volume. Visual spatial skills, this tends to be pretty well preserved other than in disease states. The ability to recognize faces, to orient items, to navigate. We all are using Google Maps or whatever map process you have. That studies have actually shown a deterioration in these parts of the brain, but not atrophy by over-reliance on these technologies, which is really interesting. I don't know what normal is anymore. I don't drive anywhere without putting Google Maps on. But these things are relatively well preserved except for disease states. The visual spatial abilities and construction, again, depending, these are examples of things that test working memory, test visual spatial skills. Working memory includes things, or the prefrontal cortex include things like sequencing, organizing, considering abstract relationships, and planning activities. The clock drawing is a perfect example. If I were to tell you to draw a clock, you have to remember what a clock looks like. You have to draw the circle. You have to plan that. You have to organize it. You have to put the numbers in. But the abstraction occurs when I tell you to put the hands in the clock at 10 minutes to 2. That's an abstract concept that requires you to draw on a different part of the brain. But the visual construction abilities typically, again, remain pretty normal with aging, except outside of disease states. Now, there are mild impairments and a decline in some of these functions, but not necessarily the point that it's interfering with activities. Language is generally very well preserved and is a little bit different between the younger adult and the older adult. So we actually show improvement comparing our grammar and our vocabulary because we continue to accrue that information and grow it with age. So the older adult tends to have greater use of terms, a greater ability to integrate that information, a larger vocabulary compared to a younger adult. But the younger adult has greater capacity to learn new information. And so for language function, we see a mixture of what occurs in the processes of language function. The maps on the right are just showing us some of the common areas of the brain which involve the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe and their connections, which are important for all language function. Language, again, remains relatively intact. Vocabulary may improve. Visual confrontation naming doesn't seem to deteriorate until slow declines in the normal aging brain occur at around 70. And verbal fluency shows a decline, again, with aging, but very slow. Here's the executive functions, and I keep alluding to these. This is an area of the brain I think I find most interesting. It is what makes us who we are. The frontal lobes are divided into, really, it's its own little brain with 3 lobes. One of it that controls emotional control called the orbital frontal cortex. Some of you may have heard of the story of Phineas Gage, who back in the late 1800s had a tamping iron from a railroad pierce his skull through the orbit and enter the orbital cortex, which lies above that portion of the skull. Phineas was a kind, generous human being until that occurred. He lost all emotional control. I think his brain may still be maybe in the Smithsonian. This was the first example that the frontal lobes are important for control of emotion. The prefrontal cortex itself also includes a mesial frontal area of the brain. That's our get up and go. The loss of motivation we see in individuals with aging brains is relatively low, but in disease states, we see individuals who would rather sleep, would rather not move, are in showering, are not getting up. These are mesial or middle of the area frontal lobe injuries that are occurring with aging in a pathologic brain. And the working memory in what's called the dorsal lateral or outside aspect of the brain in the front, important for all of the executive functions we talked about: self-monitoring, planning, organizing, reasoning, being mentally flexible, being able to problem solve, or all related to that particular area. And while we see aging changes there, as I mentioned earlier, we have compensatory mechanisms, and we have, based on our lifestyle, our education, etc., ways that we can decentralize those processes, relying on other areas of the brain that help compensate for those functions. So what declines with age is concept formulation, abstraction, and some mental flexibility, response inhibition, which we talked about. And in this particular case, I always think about my grandmother, who, as she was approaching 90, in any conversation would cut you off and give you her opinion. I have patients like this. It's almost impossible for them to hear something and not give you an automatic response. And we see a slowing of motor responses. It's why professionals, we see this with aging. There are many reasons for this, but it's also involved not just with muscles and the peripheral nervous system, but the brain itself, which integrates motor movement, becomes less efficient. And it's one of the contributing factors. You see very few professional hockey players and baseball players, and you name the sport, continuing beyond age 30 to 40 in their professional sport. It's impossible to keep up. And reasoning with unfamiliar material also declines with age. Stable throughout life is your ability to appreciate similarities. If I were to ask you what's similar between an apple and a pear, you would tell me they're both fruit. What's similar between a car and a train, you would tell me they're both modes of transportation. You wouldn't tell me they both have wheels. You wouldn't say they're both that the apple and the pear are similar because they both have seeds. You're appreciating the greater degree of similarity, the categorical similarity that's required, showing a higher cognitive function. You're able to describe proverbs, for instance. You're able to reason about familiar material. And these are areas, again, in the aging brain, we're relying on compensation for some of this. But in many of us, as we age, we're able to maintain that. So that is a really quick review of an aging brain. And hopefully I touched on some areas that were of interest to you. And I'm going to stop there and thank you for the opportunity to chat and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Reamer. That was, that did knock my socks off. That was amazing. So much information. I don't know if any board members have any questions or comments. I just was thinking along, I thought about you when you said you were in the, when you're in the emergency room and so many things are going off. As physicians begin to age and there are those high intense moments, I mean, one, does the physician know that's happening to them? Okay.
Well, I'm shaking my head only to listening to the question, not saying they know what's happening to them.
Okay. So would the people around them know that's happening to them?
Yeah, you know, I will tell you that, and you guys see you're the final common pathway in this, but we're self-policing ourselves, and we're relying on colleagues to also self-police us, or to police us. So when we do have physicians that are having difficulties, ultimately it's reported to the executive board at the hospital, and we recognize that there may be problems with emotional control. I'm dealing with that with a doctor right now, who's probably in his late 70s, who is not a DO. That's all I'll say. And but that can happen to DOs as well. And so these mechanisms are there. I can tell you I'm an older doctor and find myself in those circumstances, but hopefully you have self-awareness and you can compensate for that with strategies. So you move yourself into a quieter room, you move yourself away from the distractions, and based on the cognitive reserve, you're usually able to function pretty well.
Okay. Because I was thinking just in certain, certain parts of the profession, like surgery, there were kind of two things that you said. There was one direction of what you said around the brain that, if I continue, you use the taxi drivers as an example, right? So if I'm always doing intense surgery, very complicated, I can continue to do that because my brain, that part of my brain has gotten bigger. Yet you also said that things do start to change. So speed. So if I am doing a particular surgery and something, oops, went awry, that maybe is rare, I may not be as quick to respond, and that response could lead to potential harm.
All of that is true, what you said, but just want to just also talk a little bit about the fact that what you're describing is something we call procedural memory. So that surgeon has done that surgery 1,000 times, and like the taxi driver, but using a different area of neural circuitry. And the procedural memory actually doesn't rely on the hippocampus for short-term memory. This is an area of the brain called the striatum, which consists of a variety of structures in the cerebellum. And these are areas of the brain that help us learn with practice how to perform an activity. So suturing, remember, being in that familiar environment, being able to use the scalpel and all of the instruments, that becomes like riding your bicycle second nature. When you're suddenly exposed to something unexpected, that's the concern. And but generally, surgeons have had so much practice with that it's rare that they're presented with something in the operative field that they've not seen before. So they generally do pretty well. And it's the outliers, again, that we're talking about, which is what you're describing.
Okay. Do any board members have any comments or questions or?
I do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Reamer. This is Brett Lockman. I'm a physiatrist and a sports medicine guy, and I'm curious whether or not there are personality aspects to the aging brain that optimize or facilitate, seemingly maintenance of function into old age versus earlier decline. You mentioned, as we age, maybe you don't want to be in the ICU because of the bells and the whistles and the beeps and all the chaos. And I knew from day one that I didn't want to go into emergency medicine because that stuff bothered me then. I don't like walkie-talkies and sirens and drunk guys screaming and vomiting in the hallway. And I wanted to be able to take deep dives into things. But I'm wondering whether or not, whether you're introverted or extroverted or like the chaos and the excitement, or you want, to sit down and figure out, dermatomyositis cases. Does that manifest differently in, does the aging brain manifest differently based upon our natural inclinations to start with? I'm always amazed that, Keith Richards is still killing it despite, despite his past.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. So, frankly, I don't have an answer. I can give you a generic answer, and I didn't go into this because there's so, obviously, this could be a symposium that could last 7 days. So, but there are changes to the brain that do affect emotion and reasoning that occurs on the substrate of your inherent personality and personality traits, and will affect it differently. And then, of course, it just is based on those areas of your brain that are involved relative to structural changes. That's the most I can tell you right now. But there, a lot of this research is very new. Some of it only 10 years old. That is taking a look at both the structural and functional changes that affect specifically these cognitive domains, and then issues regarding personality and emotion and how they play in. We're really at I'm at the beginning of the story, you know. As I mentioned, Dr. DeCarli, who I know well, in his paper in 2005 was a seminal paper, but one of the first that didn't rely on looking at posthumous or cadavers to take a look at the aging brain. We finally had 2,200 individuals to look at. That's only 20 years ago. And so the advances in functional imaging and PET imaging are giving us a huge amount of information right now that's being analyzed and synthesized to be able to answer some of those questions.
Thanks. I mean, you did say some things early on, just lifestyle, right? You stated lifestyle, that you see that was seen consistently in that study of non-drinking, non-smoking, physical movement, et cetera, eating well, does have an impact on our brain.
It does, and if you pay attention to this topic, you guys asked me to talk about the normal aging brain, but we contrast that with the healthy aging brain, and that's what you're talking about. So whether that's on YouTube or you're watching PBS and Dr. Oman or a variety of sources, there's a lot of attention now towards what do we need to do to not only preserve what we have, but age healthy without disability, whether that's physical or functional disability, the world that Dr. Lockhart lives in, or whether this is actually improving our function. I think that's correct. The things we have to do to control our blood pressure, control our lipids, reduce our risk of stroke, remaining challenged and active. Lots of people do Sudoku, or they're going on the internet to use brain teasers. There's not a lot of evidence that helps right now, but there is evidence that if you want to learn a new language or never played the piano before and at age 70 decide to take it up, that these are activities that continue to allow your brain to grow, continue to allow connections or synapses between the neurons, and with physical activity, the only part of the human brain where there are neurons that can replicate themselves is the hippocampus. And we see that physical repetitive activity like exercise can result in growth of the brain and an improvement in function in that area by consequence of that. This is the only part of the brain that can continue to actually grow neurons.
Thanks for sharing that. Any other board members have any questions? Anyone in the audience? No. Moderator, do we have any one of the public members that would like to make a comment at this time online?
Let's ask. If you would like to make a comment on this presentation, you are welcome to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, or you may look for the question mark icon in the bottom right of your WebEx screen and click that to type you would like to make a comment. Are there any comments for the presenter or the presentation? I do not see any comments. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Raymer, thank you again. Really appreciate you taking the time with us today on this very informative and very important topic.
Well, thank you very much. And I once again want to thank you for the invitation and really appreciate it. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Have a good day, everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to say something? Oh, yeah. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. So that means everyone to be back here at 11:05. It's your turn. Okay. I'm welcoming everyone back. So let's resume with, now that we have all tried to figure out where our brains are on the spectrum of the growth. I know where mine is on that latter side. So let's start with agenda item number 9, our executive director's report, Ms. Erica Calderon.
Thank you, Madam Board President Pines. Once again, good morning to you, Vice President Moreno, Secretary Adamian, and members of the board. Erica Calderon here, your Executive Director, to provide you with the executive report for our February 13, 2025 board meeting. This report is intended to provide the members of the Osteopathic Medical Board with an update on personnel and other administrative functions and projects occurring at the OMBC. I will also be performing an annual review of OMBC's completed objectives for our 2024-2028 strategic plan as requested by all of you during our strategic planning session. No action is needed at this time. But before I begin my executive report, I'd like to go ahead and, as Judy mentioned earlier, formally address this board's efforts in response to the governor's state of emergency involving the Palisades fires and its survivors. At this time, the OMBC has shared several social media posts on its social media accounts by the governor's office, Cal OES, Department of Healthcare Human Services, and Listos, California, both in English and in Spanish, to alert our consumers and our licensees of resources available to them. In addition, the OMBC sent an email to all of our licensees regarding an all-plan letter issued by the Department of Managed Healthcare and waivers issued by the Board of Pharmacy. These relate to access to care, including medical drugs, devices, which also included a link to the Board of Pharmacy's webpage with other wildfire waivers issued out by them. I also shared this information with the Executive Director of Osteopathic Physicians and Surgeons of California and the American College of Osteopathic Family Physicians of California. The OMBC shared information with the Department of Consumer Affairs Communications Office regarding the volunteer physician registry. So this information can be shared with other appropriate state agency departments and sent emails to all of our licensees encouraging to sign up for a volunteer physician registry. In addition, OMBC staff are working on an individualized basis with impacted licensees on probation to help them meet their terms of their disciplinary orders and also assist with renewal waivers received by the governor's executive order, as mentioned by Judy. Lastly, the OMBC has also allowed for continuances of any scheduled administrative hearings that are located in those affected areas. In terms of personnel, the OMBC continues to have 15.9 authorized positions, and it is happy to announce that we have no vacancies at this time. We did recently, however, advertise for a limited term staff services manager who will oversee the operations of the enforcement program. I'm so happy about that, by the way. This is a position obtained through our blanket authority, and it will be a 2-year limited term assignment with the hopes that it can become a permanent position in the near future through a BCP budget change proposal. In terms of office operations, the OMBC continues to work diligently on office and program-specific improvements, as well as our overall organization. For an update on the diversion program, due to OMBC's recently lived circumstances of having our prior vendor for 20 plus years pull out from the contract, as a safety measure, the OMBC recently executed a contract with Famatech Inc. Famatech Inc. is a global manufacturer of rapid diagnostic devices and a provider of laboratory testing for medication monitoring, illicit drugs, and alcohol testing. They will provide scheduling, observation, collection, and analysis of urine, blood, and/or hair follicle testing for our probationers. Ralph has actually started a lot of communication with them. We're working on getting all of our databases intact so that we can go ahead and start using their services as well as our current vendor. Along those lines, Ralph and I attended our very first OMBC diversion committee meeting, also known as our DEC meeting, with our new diversion program contractor, Premier Health. The OMBC typically meets at the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation, San Dimas Field Office. And I am happy to announce that our very first meeting with them was a huge success. I'm actually very personally happy with the assignment of our clinical case manager and our compliance monitor that's been assigned to our board. For an update on our fictitious name permits, as previously reported, the Administrative Services Program moved all of our licensure transactions online, with the F&P being the last one to go live. I do have some sad news in terms of that. Unfortunately, this application has turned out to be extremely complicated for our licensees and their staffs, including legal counsels. Due to the complexity of ownership and liability related questions, it has created a delay in our processing of our applications and a lot of back and forth communication between our admin staff and licensees. So we have decided to deactivate the application temporarily. We are not giving up on the application completely. We're hoping that we can work with our Breeze team to see if there's improvements that can be made. But for now, we reverted back to just taking online paper applications. Along the lines of the F&P, I do have to report that enforcement just recently completed a compliance check on all of our permits. And we found several of those permits in delinquent status. And in an attempt to bring them current, we made an attempt to contact every single licensee holder whose status was in delinquent and requested that they either come into compliance immediately and renew their license, or notify us if there's a cancellation that needed to occur. The OMBC's goal with this project is to help our licensees know of the renewal process so that in a timely fashion in December of every calendar year, this is done efficiently and effectively, and we don't have any licensees out there with delinquent statuses. There are no plans to issue citations at this time. Again, our hopes are just to take this year and educate our licensee population. And then in the future, if we continue to see problems with the same individuals, we will address it as needed. In terms of the Controlled Substance Utilization and Review System, better known as CURES, I do have a couple of updates. As you all know, I represent the prescribing boards as part of the CURES Executive Stakeholder Committee. And I wanted to report that the committee meets regularly with DCA's leadership staff and the Department of Justice. Most recently, we worked on updating our interagency agreement, which sets forth the co-governance, funding, and invoicing processing of CURES by DOJ and DCA. Lastly, there is just a quick reminder. I've been mentioning at every chance that I can get, but effective April 1st, 2025, the CURES fee will be going from $9 to $15. DCA's Office of Information Department, OIS, will be working on implementing the CURES fee increase into our Breeze database. We actually have a scheduled meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. to go over that. And we also will be reaching to all of our licensees through our listserv and our normal outreach toolkits that we receive from DCA. For communications, the executive director had calls and emails exchanges with Madam Board President Denise Pines to discuss pending and ongoing projects and meeting agendas. I do continue to meet periodically with the board's attorney general liaison, Ms. Carolyn Westfall, as well as enforcement staff. And we communicate frequently with Ms. Gloria Castro as well, Senior Assistant Attorney General. Enforcement staff continue to meet monthly with the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation Office to discuss progress on pending investigations. Lastly, we have communicated with other state, local, and national organizations in discussing and deciding regulatory measures common to OMBC and others. These include the Office of Attorney General, Department of Justice, Department of Consumer Affairs, other healing our boards such as Board of Pharmacy, Medical Board, PAB, PTBC, the California Department of Public Health, Department of Healthcare Services, the Federation of State Medical Boards, the National Board of Osteopathic Examiners, and most recently, the International Association of Medical Regulatory Authorities, also known as IMRA, and of course, our Osteopathic Physicians and Surgeons of California, American College of Osteopathic Family Physicians of California, and lastly, Premier Health and several patient advocates from our consumer watchdog group. On January 28th, 2025, I did attend OPSC's board meeting and provided an update to their board of directors. In terms of outreach, our OMBC's third edition of our newsletter, Osteoscope, will be published very soon and hopefully posted on the website and shared with all of you and our stakeholders. It is worth noting that we have an update from Madam Board President Pines, Vice President Moreno, an article of OMBC's involvement with Touro University students on a collaboration to help teach students about professional identities as future osteopathic physicians and surgeons. And lastly, we have our very first student spotlight that will be presented. The OMBC continues to post content on all of our social media platforms. Actually, want to do a shout out to Mariana, who's in the audience. If you can raise your hand, she is the one that posts daily for me. So thank you, Mariana. For outreach events, we do have a couple that I need to mention. On February 27th through March 2nd, Machiko and I plan to attend Osteopathic Physicians and Surgeons of California's 65th annual convention in Newport Beach. Staff will host a table throughout the conference and answer any licensing and enforcement related questions to our licensee populations in attendance. And Dr. Patel, who is not present here with us today, has committed to attend and help with the hosting of the table. April 24th through the 26th, Machiko and I are also planning to attend the Federation of State Medical Boards annual meeting, which will be hosted, as Ms. Denise Pines mentioned, in Seattle, Washington this year. And at that meeting, we're obviously going to be spending time with Ms. Pines and hopefully Dr. Patel as well. On May 3rd, staff, most likely Machiko and I, and probably another enforcement analyst, will be attending the 4th annual Latina Maternal Health Fair, which will be hosted at the California State University in Bakersfield, California. The health fair plans to have vendors from across Kern County, including nurse, family partnerships, prenatal outreach programs, Clinica Sierra Vista, CSUB nursing program, which will be providing services like blood pressure testing. Other Kern County departments will also be present, and Head Start and Bakersfield Pregnancy Center, as well as their police department and community services, and there will be CPR training available as well. Lastly, from July 23rd to the 27th, the staff also plan to attend the American College of Osteopathic Physicians and Surgeons 49th Annual Conference in Anaheim, California. At this time, I'm going to stop and take any questions from the members and or members of the public, and we'll go into the strategic part in a little bit.
Do we have any Questions from the members? Any comments? Nope. Okay. All right, Ms. Calderon, you can move on.
Okay. So for our annual review of our 2024-2028 strategic plan, as you recall, the OMBC adopted this plan on September 23rd of 2023. This strategic plan is a written document that outlines an organization long-term goals, the strategy it will use to achieve them, and the actions needed to implement those strategies. Essentially, in our case, it is serving as a roadmap for OMBC's future direction over a defined period of 4 years. It includes elements like our vision, our mission, our core values, our objectives, and specific action plans to measure our success. And I'd like to go ahead and say thank you formally to DCA's Solid team, who actually provided us a Excel tracker, plan tracker, that gives the board a visual effect as where we are in our process in meeting those objectives. If you see the chart below, list already completed measures, and I have to report that we've been extremely busy in the first year and have already completed 90% of our overall administrative objectives, 33% of our regulation and legislative objectives, 77% of our enforcement objectives, 74% of our licensure, and 49% of our outreach and communication objectives. And again, this is in our very first year. So we still have 3 more years to get to 100%. Just to kind of go through each one of these items for board administrative, every measure, every subcategory has been met, with the exception of today's presentation of this. We indicated that we wanted to make sure that we do an annual presentation of where we are with our objectives. And so that measure will be met today. We formally added it to our agenda and is currently presenting that. We're going to keep 1.3 active for the 4 years because it is going to be an ongoing measure that we're going to be monitoring on a yearly basis. The one area, goal number 2, our regulation and our legislation, is the one that shows the most area that needs to be worked on. And one of the things that I have been in discussion with President Pines is that we do, and we actually identified this during our strategic plan, is we do need a dedicated person fully for legislation and regulations. I'm extremely happy with Miss Terry Thorfinson with all of her work that she's done, but in addition to these duties, she also manages our admin unit. So one of the things that I will be working on is hoping with DCA's, collaboration, that we could eventually get her to just focus on legislation and regulation, and possibly reorg our org chart to allow Terry to just focus on these areas. But in this category, we are talking about collaborating efforts with our association, establishing a professional day with our legislators. And so those are the things that we're going to be working on. In terms of enforcement, every item has been met with the exception of having our own in-house investigator, and as well as our fees for our early termination and reinstatements, which, as you know, we're working on a regulatory packet for that. And so hopefully in the next year or 2, that measure will be met. And in terms of bringing our own investigator, that has to go through the process of a BCP, and that can take a while, but we will be working towards those measures. For licensure, every area has been met. The only thing that I can possibly mention that's still outstanding is the interactive video. And Machiko and I are working on a script for that. And we are finalizing our enforcement video first. And the goal is to work with our communications office to then work on our licensing video. And just a reminder of that, that video is meant to help our students who are graduating, who are getting ready to go into a PTL license type, on how to navigate the licensure application process and what documents are needed so that ahead of time they can plan and have all of that ready for their application to not be delayed. For outreach, most of it is happening. I can say that a lot of the outreach efforts are going through Machiko and myself and Terry as managers. We don't have an outreach dedicated person, but we are involving our staff a lot more now. We are hoping that we can bring some enforcement staff with us and licensing staff to some of these events. But in terms of collaboration and getting these things done, we are exploring presentations at campuses. We started with Touro University, and that's working extremely well. We're getting a lot of feedback, and we're hoping to move on to the other 3 campuses that we have available to us. I think that's it. That concludes my presentation. As mentioned, a lot of it has been concluded in the first year. We still have 3 more years to go. And we'll just continue to provide you an update on an annual basis.
Great. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions about the report, executive director's report? No. So I have a question. What if we achieve like 100% or close to 100% of the strategic plan by the end of next year? What happens? Do we need to reevaluate? I know we don't want to be stagnant.
I'm not planning to be stagnant. That's fine. It's a great question. I mean, I've been told slow down, but there's a lot of things that this board has been behind in, and so there's just no way to slow down. We want to put ourselves out there. We want outreach. We want to be known, and I think we're getting to that point. I think a lot of the things that we can work within each goal is just to make improvements. Once we've met what we want to do as a foundation, we can still continue to elaborate on that. I don't foresee some of these things being 100% compliant at the end of next year. I think some of them are, like the BCPs, they take a while, anywhere from 2 to 3 years to go through. So there's going to be measures that we're still going to be working on.
Okay. And then with regards to the schools that we attend with our board meetings, is there a way we can get some active engagement in the audience, like getting the students to actually be there? I think it's important for them to see the governing body of their license and to understand a little bit more about who we are and how we operate.
Absolutely. One of the things that Machiko and I have been in discussion is to correlate, because in the past when we've been there tends to be, most of the students were off season. They were either on breaks. And so one of the things that we're working on is to make sure that when we're scheduling our board meetings, that students are going to be present at the campus. And one of the things that we can also do is actually agendize something, put it on the agenda where we have students coming in and either themselves give a presentation, or we can just have a Q&A. Other boards do that where they just allow students to come in and ask the board members questions and interact in that kind of fashion. And I think that's what we want to do in the near future.
Okay. So how would that be different? How is that format? What if I'm, not a student, but I want to participate in this Q&A between the board members?
If you're not a student?
Yeah, if I'm not a student, like, is there I mean, I don't know. I feel like why would we have the students have the ability to ask us questions, but if I'm a regular person coming to the board meeting, I can't ask a question or at least have a response back from the board?
Well, we have the ability, an agenda item for public comments that are not on the agenda so that we can hear our consumers and public come and talk about what they would like to address the board with. This might be a question for you, Ping, interaction with public. I don't know if that's just done through interested parties meetings is my understanding.
Yeah, I'd have to double check on that, but that sounds weird to me.
Okay, sort of like what we have today.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. So we will couch it inside of that time, that language.
Correct.
Okay,
Mhm.
Ms. Pines, I have a question.
yes.
Let's say much of the goals are met by the end of this year. What is the option to amend the strategic plan to add more goals and keep Erica working?
I will look into that, Dr. Lockman and Ms. Pines. I don't know. I will have to reach out to Solid. I'm pretty sure, if that is the case, that, maybe we can put it on the agenda to adopt an amended version. But I will have to check. This is my first strategic plan, so I don't have the answer, but I will definitely find it for you.
This is like a salesperson who does a really great job and they do like they were only supposed to do 15%, but they do 40%. And then the next year their goals are 50%. But that was an anomaly, right? So we don't want to, I understand when we're not also trying to, in 4 years that we've amended so much to the point that those were really advanced goals. So both of us hear where we're at, where we're just kind of wondering if some areas where we were trying to get, sort of get ourselves to a certain point, and maybe there are 1 or 2 goals that we can amend.
Absolutely. And I think some of the discussions along those lines can come out of our committee meetings that we now have. That's one of the things that I've been thinking about as we start meeting in our own committee meetings. We may have new goals and new areas to focus on. Especially I can see that happening with the outreach and, licensing in general. For enforcement, we tend to have specific items already flagged, but those discussions are definitely going to happen. And at that time, again, within those discussions, we can agendize certain things that we would like completed for certain projects.
Great. I also want to just congratulate you on filling all the vacancies. I don't think I've been on the board where they did not say, well, we have 4 or 5 vacancies still. So that's amazing. And hopefully Ms. Thorfinson is able to be permanently our ledge representative and manager, because I see in the future, just given current administration, given the climate of the things that I know are happening on a national level, that it is going to come over and start knocking on our door here in California, that we are definitely going to need to have our own, person representing us in this instance. So I'm excited about the future. Okay.
Super informative. Great presentation. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Gore.
Any other comments from our members? Any comments from, nope. Moderator, are there any public comments online?
Thank you. Yes, there are, but I want to announce the process. If anyone would like to make a comment, you can click on the hand icon to raise your hand, and I will call on people in the order received, and you will have 3 minutes with a 15-second warning. So our first commenter is Michelle Monserrat Ramos. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. And you're unmuted. Go ahead. Michelle?
Morning. I am Michelle Montserrat Ramos, and I'm with Consumer Watchdog. We appreciate the board's efforts to share social media posts in Spanish to alert the public, as well as providers of resources available to them. Thank you for listening to the public and starting to distribute resources in Spanish. This is important information to share with not just the largest ethnic group, but the largest population in California. Diversion program. We're very excited to hear about your contract with Pharmatech Inc. We trust that Ralph will get the job done with biofluid testing and that the diversion probation members will be adequately monitored to protect the public and for the licensees' own well-being. Outreach. Thank you to Executive Director Calderon for continuing her efforts to include outreach to the public. She has agreed to send staff to the 4th annual Latina Maternal Health Fair in Bakersfield in May. As you may or may not know, May is Latina Maternal Health Awareness Month across the state of California. The Central Valley has the highest maternal and infant mortality in the state of California, and it has been a true grassroots effort to direct attention to the largest birthing community in the state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next request for comment is from Tracy Dominguez. Tracy, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
I am Tracy Dominguez. I am from Bakersfield, and I am a volunteer with Consumer Watchdog Outreach. Thank you to Director Calderon for making great strides in including an outreach to the public. She has agreed to send staff to the 4th annual Latina Maternal Health Fair in Bakersfield in May. May is Latina Maternal Health Awareness Month across the state of California. After grassroots efforts and focus is beginning to take place in the Central Valley, which is important to us. It's the highest maternal and infant mortality in the state of California. Our families there need as much information and resources as possible. And thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you. Our next request for comment comes from Monique Himes. Monique, I'm sending you a request to unmute. And you're unmuted. Monique?
Watchdog. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning. I am Monique Himes. I am from Bakersfield and a volunteer with Consumer Watchdog. We want to thank the board for your efforts to share social media posts in Spanish to alert the public as well as providers of resources available to them. Thank you for listening to the public and starting to distribute these resources in Spanish. This is a critical time to share this information with the largest group in California. Outreach. Thank you to Executive Director Calderon for continuing her efforts to include outreach to the public. She has agreed to attend with staff to the 4th annual Latina Maternal Health Fair in Bakersfield in May. May is Latina Maternal Health Awareness Month across the state of California. The Central Valley has the highest maternal and infant mortality in the state of California, and more efforts need to be directed to the largest birthing community in the state. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next request for comment is from Maria Ibarra Navarrete. Maria, I'm going to send you a request to unmute. And now you're unmuted. You can go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Maria Ibarra Navarrete. I am from San Jose, a volunteer with Consumers Watchdog. I'm happy to see that this board can share the social media support with the Spanish to alert the public of resources available to them. Thank you for listening to the public and describing the resources in Spanish. This information is critical, and that Spanish-speaking individuals within the community receive it even more so during this time that they're experiencing. Diversion program. We are pleased to see that this board has taken a proactive approach with the probation license in the diversion program. We look forward to hearing updates on how the new vendor is doing with the biological fluid testing. We are in hope that the medical board would take such a proactive step to protect consumers and the substance abusing licensings as this board has done so. We have talked about ensuring that you conduct outreach to the public, and we see that you are doing so. Thank you for that. And thank you for sending staff to the 4th annual Latina Maternal Health Fair. We are in the middle of the maternal mortality crisis in California, pandemic of crisis in the Central Valley. The more resources we can bring to this community, the better. Thank you again.
Thank you. And that is the end of the request for public comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments. We are now going to move to agenda item number 10, licensing program update with Mia Quinn, Staff Services Analyst. Good morning. I think, is that on? Oh. You see it?
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm here to present the licensing to statistics and program review. Attachments 10A and 10B reflect the licensing population and application stats for the first and second quarter of the 2024 and 2025 fiscal year. Currently, there are 16,272 licensed osteopathic physicians and surgeons. There are 1,194 postgraduate training licenses, PTLs, and 1,282 fictitious name permits, and 1 temporary osteopathic physician and surgeon license. Although the report reflects a decrease in the receipt of physician and surgeon applications, it is a result of the stabilization of applicant data entry and collection into the Breeze database. Post-conversion from paper to online applications. At present, there are 256 pending physician and surgeon applications, with 18 requesting expedited licensure. Medically underserved area, there's 13 applications, and military veterans, there are 5 applications. As licensing staff prepare for the impending graduation season, they have been taking time to go through the application process and revise anything that might cause confusion amongst applicants and or streamline other processes that may no longer work for the online application as it has previously with the paper application. One change that has also improved the application process is the reversion of the manual fingerprint card submissions. In September 2024, the board returned to the process of reviewing and submitting fingerprint cards on behalf of the applicant to DOJ instead of the applicant self-submitting. By doing so, licensing staff has reduced the number of inquiry correspondences transmitted to DOJ regarding fingerprint card submissions and have had to correct fewer cards returned from DOJ lacking applicant information. Another impending change is the request for the attestation and release of information form, also known as the OMB 26, which is required to begin review of each application. However, it has been a struggle to receive the form in a timely manner, despite reminder emails being sent to applicants upon payment of their online application. During the weekly Agile Pod meetings with the Breeze team, staff proposed the inclusion of the verbiage from the form in the online application to cut back on delays, and we're told that that is something that can be easily facilitated. Thank you. Any questions?
I wasn't sure if you had more. Can you go back to what you said, the reason for the decrease, the 65% change over year? What did you attribute that to?
So we had quite a few applications that had been unprocessed during the period where we were manually entering all of the information into the
got it.
into the database. And during that time, that was also the transition into the online process for applying for licensure. So now we're seeing that the numbers are static where they should be.
Okay.
However, when you compare it to prior year numbers, it looks a little crazy, but
Okay, so we'll have a full picture at the end of this year on what would typically,
would be receiving.
right,
Yes.
would, typical growth variant.
Mhm.
Okay, understood.
Yes, that is correct, Ms. Pines, but to compare it to a prior year that was also a normal year, we're not going to see that until the following year, because here what we're doing is we're comparing our numbers from 2024, 2025 to our numbers in 2023, 2024. And like Machiko said, at that time, the applications were not being entered on a timely manner into the database. So those numbers were not being captured. So a true reflection of a stabilized year into year comparison won't really happen until 2025, 2026 in comparison to 24, 25, because we're going to be showing, I guess at the end of the fiscal year, you can say this is a total and this is a total. So you can have a grand total, but in comparison from one fiscal year to the next, like we normally do at every board meeting, you're not going to get that until the end of the calendar year to say, this is the total we received last year and this is the total we're getting this year. But to get a true picture of comparison with a normal year and a normal year, it's not going to happen until the following year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, we got a little terrified when these numbers, when we were working, I'm like, what is going on at first? But it made complete sense after we were like thinking, well, what was occurring in Q1 and Q2 of last year? It was the massive amount of paper applications that we had that we were not, inputting into the system. But these for Q1, Q2 is a true reflection of what's incoming. And that's kind of the general, you're going to see anywhere from 300 to, 250-ish to 300, 400 on any given quarter going forward.
Okay, got it. All right. Do any other board members have any questions regarding licensing?
No intent to put anybody on the spot, but I'm just curious, do we track, is it a metric? Do we have any idea how long the typical license approval takes?
So the metric states that they should be approved within 60 days from receipt of application. At this point, I think we're averaging about 37 days, give or take, depending on all documentation needed has been received. But there is a milestone, they call it an RSD, in the Breeze portal. And so if we are missing any documents, staff puts in a milestone that stops the tracking of internal processing because the brunt of the onus is on the physician that is needing to submit the documents, and then it starts again. So for those applications, it averages around 80 days, maybe a little longer, just depends on what document waiting on and what entity is responding on behalf of the physician.
I'm a simple man, so I just need to verify what I just heard. So I think you said that our goal is 60 days.
Or
We're
less.
currently at about 37 days, presuming a fully realized application. That sounds pretty darn fabulous to me. I know that's a huge increase from a couple of years ago.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a question. How much commonality now is there between OMBC and the MBC in terms of the online application? I know there were some differences, and then we were adopting some of their processes. And I know Ms. Pines has worked, and Eric, you've worked with both. The reason I ask is because I just on some social media thing the other day, I saw just a vociferous amount of complaints about the online MBC process. And I know we're sort of adopting things there. So I mean, what you just said with regard to a goal of 60 and hitting 37 sounds great, but I didn't have any experience with MBC, so I don't really know what.
They're
Maybe those those applicants just had incomplete submissions,
Mhm.
and
can
that's
be
why they're running into that.
a multitude of things, especially with MedBoard having quite a few different units within their licensing unit based off of the method of licensure. So reciprocal licensure, those physicians that are attending international schools, which we don't accept at this point. There can be a number of things, but in terms of the actual licensing process, we all go through the same portal. Our forms are actually very similar. The only difference is they have the docs portal, which I've been asking for 3 years and I still have not received. However, we're accepting electronic documentation in office. So
Sounds like a strategic plan ad.
no, it's there. I'm like, can we get the portal? But where we once did not receive electronic documents, we do now. So their postgraduate training certification will accept those as long as it's coming from an entity from the school that's authorized to speak on behalf of the school, things like that. So yeah, it's similar, but there's those subtle nuances that are that affect the process.
It's also worth noting, Dr. Lockman, that if all of the documents are in, and we have experienced that, these ladies are initiating and processing the application within 5 days at max. So if all of the documents, and unfortunately, some of it has to come from first source, the school themselves. But if everything is in, they are processing them right away. So that 30-day, it is an average. It could come down. And part of our efforts and wishing, to bring that down a little, further, will be that video to tell them, like, before you submit your application, please work with all of these entities first, make sure they're sending everything, because we do, at the moment we receive one document, even if we don't have the application on file, we are keeping that because we know an application is coming in the near future. So as long as we start the process early and educating them on what is needed, I think that's going to even bring the number down.
And the OMB 26, that's the biggest part. It's the attestation and release of information form. Even though they attest to some of that on the online application, there are things on the form that are not in the application, which is what we want to implement. We changed our CEN notification, which is an email. Hey, thank you for applying. We'll be with you shortly. But did you submit your OMB 26? Despite that email going out to applicants, they're not coming, the form's not being received. So we're hoping by implementing that form into, or incorporating that form into the online Breeze application, that will also cut down on the processing times as well.
Okay. Are there any other board comments or questions? Do you have a part 2? Okay. I don't know why I thought you had like a part 2, right? So is that the end for licensing? Okay, thank you both so much. I appreciate it. Yeah. Are there any comments in the room? Or one person? No. Moderator, are there any public comments online?
Thank you. If anyone would like to make a comment on the licensing report, you may do that by raising your hand, and we will give each speaker 3 minutes with a 15-second warning. Are there any comments on the licensing report? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to agenda item 11, Administrative Services Program. Terry Thorfinson, our Administrative Services Program Manager.
Thank you, Madam President, board members. I wanted to briefly touch on, physicians and surgeons renewals. As you can see, statistics vary, which is natural, but nothing out of the ordinary. But the big focus is with the imminent, I'm hoping, approval of our regulatory package we're starting right now to begin the implementation and creating the documentation that's needed for implementing that reg package, which is substantial because we're creating essentially Once the regulation is implemented, we're creating a renewal that would be self-renewed, which is different than it is now. So that application will change, and it'll also have to have questions to adhere to the mandates that we're now putting into the reg, and a lot of templates and new FAQs to guide people to be able to go to and see, because there's a lot more that we're highlighting in our reg package that in terms of compliance requirements for CMEs, and so we need to change that as well. So that's moving on. I wanted to, because you can see the statistics, I wanted to just expand on what Erica talked about with our FNP. I wanted to emphasize to the board that our decision to, at least right now, take down the online application for the FNP did not come lightly. There was pretty dramatic evidence of problems, and I wanted to highlight that among the things was very, very high denials, sometimes for applicants as many as 4 times. And it just felt like when I looked at the applications that they were really being stumped by the online application and the format. And the online application, which we cannot change, basically asked an entity question 4 times and then gave a list of 22 irrelevant choices. 3 of them were relevant for them to choose. And when I looked at the applications that were denied, that seemed to be a real, barrier. People were confused by what we were asking and what we were showing as their choices. And it just made the application not be able to be cured, which is different than, say, they needed to change or check out a different compliant FMP name. That could be something that could be curable. And we just couldn't stand by and let this very high denial rate continue when there was clearly a problem with the Breeze template and that we couldn't change it. We are continuing to try to improve in the background to see if we can improve. But one of the things I also wanted to emphasize, which I emphasized in the memo, is the stream. It was counterintuitive to observe the results, which was we have now an online system that should be streamlining and more efficient, but it was less efficient and it created increased workload and increased denials. So one of the reason is if adding the convenience for both sides, applicants as well as the board, of a credit card payment made the applications that would normally have been turned back because they were so flawed and incomplete, they now became needing to be processed from the board. Those represented the chunk of ones that we had to deny. And so it's sad to say goodbye, at least temporarily, for the credit card function. And we thought about, well, could we try to keep the credit card function? But what happened is having the credit card function actually ushered in all of these incomplete, deficient applications that couldn't be changed. So I don't know that will change. So we're going to have to go back to the manual application with a check. The other thing that we noticed is that it was creating increased staff workload to have to deal with applications. Again, we would have normally rejected initially because they were incomplete and so flawed that we were now having to deal with them. And the way that the online system was set up is they had 90 days to cure stuff. Well, some of the stuff they could cure, okay, but that increased our performance measures, as you'll see in the numbers, from like the 5 days we had with the manual to what we currently have, I think, is 57 days. So that was giving the applicants the time to cure things, but it also looked like our performance, that we were delaying, which we were not. We were waiting for compliance. So we're moving towards it. And today is the first day that the online application is not in place. It went into production last night. And so people will have to download the application and submit it with a check or money order. And I think and I anticipate it'll be more streamlined, and we'll see fewer rejections once somebody has come into the process, because we're screening them at the beginning. And if they're not complete, then we're sending them back. Now, from observing the amount of time that staff has to answer phone calls and emails, it's very clear that the F&P, for some reason, I think because of the complexity of the legal entities, that there needs to be more staff time devoted to like a concierge type service, which we don't have the luxury of. Our receptionist is dealing with F&Ps as well as other things. So, with a dedicated F&P staff, potentially, that could be a game changer, in the future, because applicants clearly do not understand the application. The manual version is very short and it's very streamlined. It doesn't ask questions more than once. I know, Dr. Swain, you were complaining about being in applications asking the same information. Our F&P does not do that. And
Terry, and I think it's worth noting too that the platform that we're working out of is a platform that's utilized by all the boards and bureaus
Yes.
too. So it's not for this particular application, it wasn't made for us specifically. So we're having to use, and when Terry mentioned that it was confusing because it gave a list of 20 different entity types, that's every other Healing Our board and their own specific entities. So when we had language in those categories to identify, these are the three options for you only as an osteo that you can pick out of: a partnership, a limited liability, or a corporation. It also had 20 others. And, not taking the time to read the instructions was one of the things that we were noticing, that, they want to go through the application quickly and process it. But without reading the language that we included in there, it was nearly impossible for them to pick the right choice and to be consistent throughout the entire application so that it could go through. So it's not an application platform that was just created for us. It's something that we share with all the other boards and bureaus. And unfortunately, we can't make changes unless we all agree with that. And that's not going to happen. So that's one of the things that, I know that I didn't want there to be confusion as to why would we create an application that's not efficient for us. That's not what we did. We used a platform that was already in existence. This is not working for us.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because some of the things that we've done, let's say for initial licensing, we've gotten to customize the application the way we want. But FMP, is just not true. And it's just so much more complex. And when you watch someone with inconsistent answers pick one type of entity, and then the next screen, they pick a different entity, it causes that application to be deficient in a way we can't cure it. And so that happens so much. We just couldn't stay in good conscience, sit there and let people just keep doing that. So I'm hoping it's a good thing, even though it's kind of counterintuitive and a step backwards, but I'm hoping we get back into a more streamlined situation. But there still remains this need for some kind of technical assistance that takes a lot of time dealing with the legal entities. And most people have, I think, a legal entity, but there's confusion about whether it's a professional corporation, which is where our name requirements come in, whether it's what type of sole proprietorship. I mean, people were picking sole proprietorship, and then the next screen with all of the different choices were picking corporations. I don't know how to interpret that other than that it was confusing. and that it didn't lead them to consistently keep the type of entity that was needed. And the way that the Breeze works is it needs answers in these different screens to trigger other screens. You know, certain screens, an answer will trigger certain screens to show up and hide other screens. So it is needed, you know, in terms of the logic. It just was too complex for compared to what our manual application is. So, but we'll be continuing to work on that. And that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, I just want to go to that because I'm not confused, but so if all of the boards use Breeze, right? And they all have so are they all having this issue? Have they all decided to go back to a manual aspect of?
No, and they were, well, go ahead, Erica.
I was going to say for the FNP, Ms. Pines, there's very few that actually have it out there live. Medical board does not, and it's because of this exact reason. We tried, we made an attempt ourselves to do it. We seem, you know, us as the board, when we go through it, we're able to answer the questions because we know what's expected. So it is something that we can work towards and improving and potentially get there. But it's going to require maybe an interactive video to go along with it, or more language in like bolded and red, you know, something to that effect. Because what's happening right now, you have the 3 different types. You have partnership, corporation, and limited.
No, not sole
limited.
proprietor.
Sole proprietor.
Mhm.
So if you start the application as a corporation, you have to consistently answer as a corporation all of the questions, and that's not what's happening. They started as a corporation and then somehow end up answering a question that's for a partnership or vice versa. And so that's what's making it complicated. That, well, first of all, most of our physicians are not doing these. They have a staff member in their office, a manager. So there is a lot of education that has to go along with it to make sure we explain the different types of entities, and you know, that they consistently answer the questions as are applicable throughout the entire application. That's not happening.
Okay. I mean, it seems like it's easy to solve, like just with like a direction, you know, like you're on this screen, here's what's next, you're on the screen, here's what's next, you're on the screen, here's what next. Do we have a document like that?
The problem is this one screen
Uh-huh.
that lists all of the irrelevant, you know, topics. Only 3 of those out of the 22 are relevant to our choices. And we have in red below that instructions, only choose the following 3 to
From the
do that.
phone.
And even with that, that's current. That was the way our current online was created. We have a lot of instructions on the online to try to prevent misunderstanding and stuff, and none of those work. And I would say in my work with Breeze, if we had the ability, which we've been told several times we don't, is to get rid of that template screen with all those irrelevant choices, then it would be easy. Nobody'd flunk, you know? It would just, they'd be asked, and then when they have to add, the screen that has the irrelevant choices has a very important information that Breeze needs, which is the FEIN number. Okay, so that and the choice then dictates the following screen. So it's not like we want to get rid of it. We just want to get rid of the confusing other entities that are listed. And Breeze is shared not only by boards, it's shared by states and Canadian provinces. And so one of the challenges early on is that it was to try to take an existing database and customize it for the board's needs. And DCA spent years doing that. And the contract was expensive, and they have moved to trying to create enterprise systems that can work with Breeze more easily, so that the software part on the outside, that's what our HCI survey is an example of. HCI survey is in a different software, but it's linked to Breeze. And so it can pull the data. It's kind of the best of both worlds, but the software can be easily changed, whereas it was not easily changed in Breeze. And we just, for some reason, because other entities, maybe in Canada or other states, use these labels, DCA can't subtract. They may, from looking at some of the labels, they may be able to add, but they can't subtract. And what we need is simplification. Just the 3 entities that we accept for FMPs to be listed. And that's what's on our manual application, you know? You just pick once, what is your entity that you're applying with? And then there is no other question. You skip ones that aren't relevant. You know, if you're a sole proprietor, you don't answer the corporation. If you're a corporation, you answer only the corporation. You skip the sole proprietor on our manual application. And unfortunately, I was shocked to find out we couldn't change that. I was shocked to see the screens and how many questions. And with most of the other work, we've been able to work around it. This is just one time. And as Erica mentioned, I think other boards were looking to see if we could do it successfully.
Right.
And so now that's kind of a, it's a drawback for other boards thinking if we can't do it, then, maybe they won't do it. And we do have, it doesn't affect our renewals of the FMPs. So we still have that online functionality, which is fast. But this one just didn't work the way we wanted to. And we do even give the advice, because we're not supposed to give legal advice, is that if you don't understand, hire an attorney to advise you. Because sometimes it really gets into explaining the difference of the entities, which is a bad sign. If people don't understand the legal entities to begin with.
Okay, thank you.
Needless to say, we're not going to give up.
Not giving up.
We're not giving up. We're just taking a little bit of a break and maybe a different approach. We did mention it was so complicated. It does have a lot of language. A lot of our frequently asked questions were incorporated into the application. So that might be also an issue, that they're so overwhelmed with the amount of information that they're just not reading. So maybe simplifying the application might be the approach, having an interactive video that goes along with it. Look at this video before you apply, maybe another option for us. So we're not going to give up on it. We are just going to reanalyze it and see what would be the best, process for our outcome to be established.
Okay, great. Are there any comments by board members in the audience? Moderator, is there anybody requesting a public comment?
This is the moderator. If anyone would like to make a comment on the report, you may look for the hand icon and click that to raise your hand. And each speaker will be given 3 minutes with a 15-second warning. Are there any comments? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
And next up is agenda item number 12, enforcement program. Christy, hello. Christy is our enforcement analyst.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Christy Livermento. I'm an enforcement analyst with the enforcement unit. For background information, this is a report on the updates involving the board's enforcement unit for the second quarter of fiscal year 2024/2025 analysis. In an effort to provide more expeditious investigations, the enforcement unit has once again revised their consumer complaint form. This time, additions were made to the medical releases. The following language was added to the authorization to release, disclose, and discuss information pursuant to the authorization language and signature at the bottom of the releases. In addition, the board has included that these releases include the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation, which is the state law enforcement agency that conducts investigations on behalf of the board. By adding D of I to our releases, we are reducing processing times for the division as they could now pursue with requesting additional records and scheduling interviews without having to obtain new releases for their division. This information has been shared with all of D of I's deputy chiefs. As previously reported, the enforcement unit helped with the FNP delinquent license project. 581 delinquent FNP licenses were reported with expiration dates of December 31st, 2024. The list was split upon enforcement staff, and enforcement staff began making contact with the license holder, informing them of the delinquent statuses and letting them know to renew their license, as well as providing instructions on how to do that. Staff also informed the licensee holder that if the license was not renewed, the business may be in violation of operating with a delinquent license. As reported during the last meeting, enforcement staff have begun conducting interviews for quality of care complaints where gross negligence and/or incompetency allegations were noted. During the last quarter, when we began conducting the interviews, 13 interviews were offered, 2 were completed, and 1 was declined by the complainant. As for the remaining 10, the board received no response for the attempted interview. Enforcement staff continues to work on its purging project of old enforcement cases. Closed cases continue to be purged based on the retention schedule and room and storage in the confidential shred bin. Discs and CD drives are purged separately from paper files. Also, now in the file room, files are being filed in case number order rather than alphabetically, which allows for more convenient access for pooling files for purging in the future. Board program statistics. For statistics, please refer to attachment 12A, which will cover the enforcement program's Q1 and Q2 statistics for fiscal year 2024/2025 in comparison to fiscal year 2023 and 2024 quarters 1 and 2. Performance measure 1 covers the amount of consumer complaints, arrest, and conviction notices received. The unit has received 499 complaints and 16 arrest/conviction notices. This is a significant increase in the complaints and a 14% increase of arrest and convictions in comparison to last fiscal year. The only explanation to the increase in complaints can be attributed to the fact that enforcement is now initiating enforcement complaints on applications with prior arrest histories, in addition to more board awareness that the board is receiving through its outreach efforts. Performance measure number 2 is the average number of days it takes for our analysts to initiate an enforcement complaint and acknowledge receipt. The target rate for this performance measure is 10 days, and we are meeting that mandate, initiating and acknowledging complaints within 5 days. Performance measure 3 is the average number of days it takes to complete investigation and enforcement action for cases that are not referred to the Attorney General's office for formal discipline. Case aging here fluctuates greatly because it takes an average of all cases, and 1 or 2 very complicated cases can skew these numbers drastically. These numbers include the timeline for desk and D of I's HQIU investigations. The target for PM3 is 365 days. Our average for Q1 and Q2 is at 185 days, which is a decrease by 14% in comparison to last fiscal year. It is also worth noting that in addition to this decrease, the board is also completing a lot more investigations in comparison to last year. The board's volume year to date is at 468 cases in comparison to 361 last year, which equals to an increase of 30% investigations. Performance measure number 4 is the number of days it takes to complete investigations and enforcement actions that are transmitted to the Attorney General's office for formal investigation. Case aging in this category is at 1,027 days. The target rate for PM4 is 540, and although we do not meet the target in this category year to date, this fiscal year it did go down by 22% in comparison to last fiscal year. Currently, there are 18 matters pending at the Attorney General's office. For fiscal year 24-25, the board continues to be well under its performance measure targets for 3 of its performance measures. As previously reported, PM4 is the measure that unfortunately the board has less control over, as this measure takes into consideration the timeline from the Attorney General's office, respondents, legal representatives, and the administrative office hearings. At the time of preparing this briefing paper, the board currently had 580 enforcement cases split between the 5 enforcement analysts. Also, 91 of those cases are at the Division of Investigation, and 18 of those cases are at the Attorney General's office. These numbers have risen since the last board meeting. However, staff continue to work all enforcement cases in an expeditious manner. Year to date, the board has filed 3 interim suspension orders, 4 accusations, issued 1 administrative citation, placed 5 licensees on probation, and had 1 licensee surrender their license. Also, 1 license was revoked. As expected, discipline and administrative actions are decreasing this fiscal year, and this is due to the fact that the backlog is coming to an end and we're now addressing incoming complaints. We do expect this number to continue to remain steady as we are seeing an increase in overall complaints received.
Thank you. You want to make a comment?
I do. I actually have a couple of comments to make just to highlight the statistics a little bit in a more in-depth perception here. The bottom of this agenda item document, we have a 6-year historical consumer complaint and arrest and conviction analysis. And I wanted to let the members know that in 2019, we were averaging 613 consumer complaints. In 20, during COVID, it did drop down a little bit to 596, but just in the last 2 years, we did a huge jump. In 2023, 2024, we ended up with 889 consumer complaints. So that's almost 200 more than our normal average. And I wanted to point out the reason behind that. When I first came to this board, we were not initiating complaints for the applications that Christy mentioned earlier. We were reviewing applications, but not initiating an actual complaint to track the review of the enforcement workload. So it was just an application that was given to the exec, and then the exec would sign off and either approve it or deny the application. But the workload that was being done to make that determination was not being captured. So part of what we are doing is we're collecting police reports, we're collecting court documents, we're collecting statements from that applicant to figure out, is it safe to initiate the licensure? And so that was not being captured, and it's important to capture all of enforcement workload for future positions and future growth arguments. And so that's the huge jump in 2023, 2024 that I think it's worth noting, because it is a huge discrepancy from one year to the other. So it is now reflecting the actual work. And then in 2024, 2025, right now, we're 6 months into our fiscal year, we're already at 619. So my projections for this year are going to be closer to 1,000 complaints, which, you know, we do have 2 other analysts that join the unit. So it is doable. It's feasible for us. We don't have concerns about workload, but I thought it would just be worth noting that, you know, in the last 2 years, where enforcement has seen an increase of 400 complaints, which is a huge argument for that enforcement manager to come on board, right?
Mhm.
So that's one of the things I wanted to mention. And then in target performance measure 3, you'll see that reflected, that in addition to the added workload, we are handling our investigations in a more timely fashion. So just in this last Q1, Q2, you can see that year to date, we are at 468. So we have more investigations happening, but at the same time, the cycle time is dropping. So you're seeing a 30% increase and a 14% decrease in overall investigations. So they're not only getting more cases, but they're working them a lot faster. So
Mhm.
it's, you know, commendable for my enforcement team. They're doing an amazing job, and very, very proud of them, if I can say.
So, yeah, that is actually really good news. So what do you think is getting them to process faster, even though they have more cases to process? Is it that you have actually the staff to do it? Is it?
It's the staff, Ms. Pines, but it's also the managerial oversight that goes along with it. We are doing still to this day one-on-ones with myself.
Mhm.
So I meet with them every Wednesday for one-on-ones. We are also doing roundtable meetings, and that I love our roundtable meetings. And Christy and Beth, who's in the audience, can tell you that it's interactive. We're coming together, working on complex cases, and I can say that after 2 years, now I'm at the point where I'm like, well, what do you think? They now know how to work their cases. They have a clear roadmap as to what's needed. Now they're communicating amongst each other to come up with, you know, plans of action. So it's just that consistency of meeting every week, staying on top of their caseloads, the pending reports that are being provided to them, which again, it's their roadmap to their high priority cases, their age cases. They're working off of that report on a daily basis. So we're targeting age cases, we're targeting expedited cases, those that have allegations that need to just go straight to the field are being flagged right away, and they're leaving our office within 2 to 3 days.
Okay.
Do
And
we
then the
have,
18 cases that, I'm sorry, at the AG's office, what are generally those particular cases?
Those are cases that are either pending for an accusation or
Mhm.
pending disciplinary proceedings after an accusation. So it's active cases are actively at the AG's office being worked on.
But I guess my question is, what type of those cases are those?
Oh, that's a variety of
It's
everything.
not
Yes,
anything in
Ms.
particular.
Pines.
No, okay.
Correct. Yeah. And then the same thing for HQIU cases. We currently have 91 pending
Yep.
cases at the HQIU level. So this is not desk level. This is at HQIU. And again, it's a variety of different
Okay.
types of complaints.
Okay.
do we have a possible cause that is the reasoning for the increase in cases? Such a
A
big increase?
cause?
Yeah.
Yeah, like we mentioned, I think it's awareness. We're doing a lot more outreach. We're doing a lot of social media outreach. People are now knowing, you know, they are more aware that osteo exists and not just medical boards. So we're getting a lot more cases coming to us faster. But I think the more significant increase is that we're actually opening cases on those applicant cases so that we can track the workload. The other thing that I did want to mention here at the bottom, you are going to see a decrease in discipline occurring. And I want to mention that because it is significant. You're seeing like 50% decrease, 100% decrease. That is also because we're normalizing. You know, we had a backlog for the last 2 years in enforcement cases, and now we are targeting cases based on what we have, current workload. And so those reflective numbers, are not necessarily meaning that we're not pursuing cases administratively. It's just slowing down this year now. We're going to start seeing, a little bit less, whereas last year we were filing, 15 accusations all at once because we were catching up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Well, you'll probably keep having to remind us of that when we look at the numbers. Are there any additional comments from board members? No? Thank you, Ms. Liverento.
Thank you.
Are there any comments from members okay? Yay. Yeah. Is it on? I don't think it's on. Just right there.
There we go. Sorry. Hi again. Good afternoon. Apologize. Holly McChris, Executive Director, Osteopathic Physicians and Surgeons in California. Erica, I do have a question. The increase in disciplines or the increase in complaints are all of these complaints just on osteopathic physicians, or do these complaints on other healthcare providers or other entities?
It's just osteopathic physicians.
Okay. Moderator, is there anyone requesting a public comment online?
There are, and to reiterate the process, if anyone would like to make a comment online, you may look for the hand icon and click that. And we do have our first commenter is Monique Himes. Monique, I will send you a request to unmute your microphone and you'll have 3 minutes. You're unmuted.
Thank you. I am Monique Himes. I am from Bakersfield and a volunteer with Consumer Watchdog. We are very pleased to hear that the required interviews before a quality of care complaint is closed are being offered to families. I know that if we would have had this opportunity before my grandson's death complaint was closed, we would have had a chance to fight for a complaint and fight for the special statute of limitations that he was denied. We noticed that out of 13 interviews offered, that 10 families did not respond to the board. We would like to see how we can help publicize the required interview and the importance of the opportunity to speak on behalf of the complaint the family filed. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next request for comment is from Michelle Monserrat Ramos. Michelle, I'm going to send you a request to unmute. And you're unmuted.
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Montserrat Ramos, and I'm with Consumer Watchdog. Basically, I'm going to reiterate what Monique just mentioned. It's so incredibly important. One, I have to say before I start, we're really happy to hear that the board has started the required interviews, and you did this and set this up so quickly and started doing it before the medical board did. I share Monique's concern that so many complainants, families are not responding to the board's request for the required interview. And I'd also like to know how we could work with you on our end to see how we could publicize this and reiterate the importance of this opportunity. As Monique said, so many other families didn't have this opportunity, and with this opportunity, it may shed light on some information the board didn't have and may save some of these complaints. So any way we could help, we're here to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next request for a comment is from Maria Ibarra Navarrete. Maria, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Yes, hi, same thing. I'm going to reiterate just what the other advocates have said. I'm Maria Ibarra Navarrete, and I'm from Consumers Watchdog. I'm pleased to hear that the board is continuing interviews for quality of care complaints before closing them. I was an advocate for our team, along with other advocates that fought for this legislative change. Had I had this opportunity for a required interview, at the time I filed my complaint, I would have had a chance to fight for my brother's complaint, have an open dialogue with the interviewer, and provide additional information that possibly at the time the board didn't have, or that didn't come forward at the time that I filed my complaint. This is such an important change that I hope more families will see the importance of participating, regardless of all families desire accountability and closure. And some of these steps are leading towards that. If there's any way that we can work with the board staff to help promote the required interview and the importance of it, we are happy to help. Thank you again.
Thank you. And I do not see any further requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. We are now going to move to agenda. Did you want to say something?
Ms. Pines, if I can correct the record, Holly, to answer your question, it also includes unlicensed practice. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Moving to agenda item 13, a presentation on the board's probation program. Ralph Correa, our probation monitor.
How you folks doing today?
We're good.
Good. All right. Afternoon, folks. My name is Ralph Correa. I am the probation monitor for the Osteopathic Medical Board. So, in going over our stuff here routinely, the website information is regularly being updated. So that's something that I got checked on the other day. One of our analysts called me and said, "Hey, Ralph, I noticed somebody's not updated. There's something we need to do," and it immediately was jumped on and it was corrected. So it is done regularly. Okay. As far as the total number of physicians on probation, as of today's date, I have 34 licensees on active probation. 6 of those people are totally out of state. Again, they do not live in this state. They have a license here, but they're not practicing in this state. So they're not receiving any credit towards completion of probation for the licensure here in California. Okay, so I'll make sure I touch that. I do have 3 licensees that have what's called an interim order. It's an interim suspension order, but a stay was granted, so they are allowed to practice medicine as long as they adhere to specific guidelines. Most of those people those physicians come from the diversion program, and they're in a process of potentially transitioning over to probation. So those are being monitored right now by me, even though their orders are somewhat smaller. So it's not really a disciplinary type order, but they agreed upon some type of guidance while they are in the process of the accusation being formed or completed or adjudicated in this matter. Okay. Obviously, these physicians are in addition to the 34 that are already on probation, and obviously have the potential to adding on for probation caseload. As far as the review of cases, quarterly reviews, I do conduct those every single quarter. I meet with my probationers individually. I collect all information, the documents that are necessary. I speak to their practice monitors, worksite monitors, anybody that they have some type of proctor connection to. I have to initiate that information and get that from them, and I go ahead and document it in an actual report. So once again, I told all of you, either as a board or individually, feel free to come to my office. I'll be more than happy to go over my caseload with you. Be more than happy to look through my books and see what I have. Okay, because I do collect and write down a report for each and every one. Okay. As of this year, 27 of the 34 probationers remain compliant. Again, that's because the 6 are out of state. Okay, so I can't really monitor them a whole lot. Just the fact that they're breathing and they're licensed in another state, I just keep track of that to make sure if they're still practicing, if they want to come back to California, then I'll go ahead and start them on probation for here. Okay. We do maintain a effective and thorough accountability of our physicians on probation. Regarding non-compliance, I have one physician that does have a cease practice order, and it will remain in effect until either the compliance is met and or a petition for revocation is filed. So I'm still waiting for that to happen. Regarding the diversion program, we have completely transitioned over to the new organization called Premier Healthcare. And obviously, the director and I did conduct our first quarterly meeting with their administration, went over with them through all the nuts and bolts of how they're going to deal with the doctors that go voluntarily, and see how they're going to work their program, and then I'll coincide with them and make sure that I get all the documents that I need from them to find out, what's going on, make sure that they're maintaining their compliance with them, just so I can keep track of, figure out if the accusation is going to be born or if eventually they're just going to be good and they can just wallow off and just disappear into the world again. The next board meeting will take place, or not board meetings, correction, the DEC meeting is going to be scheduled to take place this coming April 17th. And that's all I have for you folks.
Okay, thank you, Ralph.
All right.
Are there any comments from the board? No. Okay, are there any comments in the room? Moderator, are there any public comments online?
There are, but I will reiterate the instructions. If anyone would like to make a comment, you may click on the hand button hand icon to raise your hand. Our first commenter is Tracy Dominguez. Tracy, I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, I am Tracy Dominguez and I am from Bakersfield. I'm a volunteer with Consumer Watchdog. Diversion Program. We are excited to hear about your contact with Pharmatech Inc. We trust that Ralph will get the job done with biofluid testing and with the diversion probation members. We are accurately monitoring to protect the public. We would like to know at a further meeting how the management of the testing conduct is impacting the probation department. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do not see any further requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you again, Ralph. Okay, so now it is time for lunch. We're going to do a 45-minute lunch break. So we should come back at about 1:30. Let's say 1:30. We'll return back.